All right. The little bar is going. I think I need a third screen too. I need to be more like Jeremy. All right. It is live. So you can go ahead and start the meeting at your convenience.
Great. So I would like to call the July 6th, 2020 Henrietta Town Board public hearing meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley.
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford.
Here.
Councilmember Safranek.
Here.
Councilmember Bolsner.
Here.
Supervisor Schultz.
Here. So we'll begin the meeting with a silent prayer followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have 3 public hearings tonight. I'd like to open the first public hearing for the proposed establishment of extension number 169 for Lehigh Park 2 to the Henrietta Water District, number 1. Is there anybody? Chris, do we normally have someone present for this, or?
Normally we don't, Supervisor. However, Peter Vars is right there, and his team did the project, so I'm sure he would be there to answer any questions that the town board may have.
So does the town board have any questions with regards to the establishment of the extension? Anyone?
No, sir.
Is there anybody in the audience who has a question regarding the extension 169 to the Water District?
There are no questions or comments in our virtual audience.
You're not fit.
Hearing no questions or comments, I bring the public hearing for the proposed establishment of extension number 169 Lehigh Park 2 to Henrietta Water District number 1 to a close. Next up, we have a public hearing for the proposed establishment of extension number 221 for Lehigh Park 2 to the Henrietta Sewer District number 1. Same thing. Anyone from the town board have any questions? Anybody from the audience have any questions?
There's nothing from the virtual audience.
Hearing no comments or questions, I call the public hearing for the proposed establishment of extension number 221 for Lehigh Park 2, the Henrietta Sewer District number 1 closed. And finally, I have the proposed forest view cluster subdivisions, lands available for conservation easement and open space. We will open the public hearing for this. I would like to make a note that we are first going to address questions with respect to the parkland and such. We will conduct that portion of the public hearing. We will then continue to hear comments about the project in general, but I first want to focus on the business at hand, which is whether the town is going to accept lands available for the conservation easement and the open space. I will note that one of the things when we were looking at this, as we were approached about this project, the land immediately to the south is land owned by the town that straddles the Lehigh Valley Trail. But unfortunately, when that was included, there was no access provided for getting to that land from any road. You can walk to it, but there was no parking areas. There was no facilities of any kind. And so the land isn't as useful as public land because the public has trouble getting to it. So when this came up and we were talking about the possibility of this, I approached the developer as to whether he would be willing to build a road in off of his street so that there could be access for a facility back there, a parking lot where people could drive and potentially, get on the, whether it's walking or mountain biking on the trail, or we've also talked about having, restrooms and either a pavilion or a cabin. The decision as to how we would lay that out down the road is a decision potentially in the future. The question is whether we want to accept the donation of this land for the creation of a future park. If you look at the third one on the bottom, and this is the same one I asked you to share previously, Becky. You could share that one on the screen. The one that shows the preliminary layout of the park. So this shows what the development, proposed development looks like. One of the things I will note, when this was originally proposed, it was 0 lot line duplexes essentially. There was a lot of pushback on that from a character of neighborhood standpoint, from a seeker standpoint. The developer has since switched to single residence homes, no more 0 lot lines, no more duplexes. And so that's what you see depicted there. And then if you'll notice in the bottom, there is a white road coming out of the development heading to the south. It curves around just off screen and comes into a parking lot and potential pavilion or cabin around behind that curve of trees. And so the idea would be from there, we would cut trails over to the Lehigh Valley Trail and to the other, on the portion of land to the southwest of the Lehigh Valley Trail, there is kind of a pond / swamp area, and then there is some higher ground around it. So the idea is we would make kind of a loop path back, so there'd be some, call it hiking trails in that area. Is kind of what we're looking at. One of the things that had an interest in this for me is if you look at our town parks throughout the town, there really isn't anything in the southeast quadrant of town. We have parks in the southwest quadrant of town with Breeze Park, in the northeast quadrant with Tinker. But what we don't have is anything in the southeast quadrant. The closest you come is right at essentially where between the southeast and northeast quadrant you have Lookup Park, and between the southeast quadrant and the southwest quadrant you have Martin Road Park, which is right off of Middle Road, which is essentially about where it divides, but there really is nothing in the southeast quadrant. So, and further, I've always felt that the town is a little deficient in town parks, or in parks period. Part of that's because we're one of the few towns that doesn't have any county parks in it. So this potentially adds to that. So was my interest in the park from a town standpoint. And so if this project was to go through, the idea is let's look at making a park out of that. I will note that there are some people who have expressed a desire for us to turn the park down so that this project doesn't go through. That's not actually how it works. If we turn down the park, the developer just has to put a conservation easement to meet the New York State clustering laws. What is that, 270?
278.
278. So that's governed under New York State clustering laws. What's that?
So they have no,
Speaking of the mic.
I'm sorry. I'll get it.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so basically, they would have to, instead of it being town land, it would have to be a conservation easement. Either way, that's covered under, like I said, under the New York State clustering laws.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry.
So now I'm going to just open it up to questions from the board, and then we'll go to questions from the public.
sorry about that, Steve. So my question was, if we turn it down, we wouldn't get the parkland.
We would not get the parkland, correct? It would be, again, essentially a conservation easement.
Yeah, the town board's jurisdiction for this particular public hearing, and in fact, its jurisdiction for this project, as it is altogether at this point at the town board, is just to consider whether the lands proposed to be non-private owned lands, that is, in this case, at least the parkland, to determine whether they're of significant townwide benefit so as to accept them as townwide parklands. That's the extent of your jurisdiction on this application.
Any questions with regards to the idea for the park and accepting it? Is there anyone who doesn't think it would be a benefit to the town to have a park in the southeast quadrant in that area? Go ahead.
Is there a certain amount of time that we would have to develop it by, or there's no?
There's no timeline. The thing is, once you accept it as future parkland, it comes under parkland alienation rules. So we couldn't turn it to something other than either open conservation area or parkland without having to go through that process, which involves the state legislature. We couldn't give it back. We couldn't do it something non-public. Once we take it for parkland, it comes under parkland alienation rules. One of the questions that came up was whether a cabin or pavilion that can potentially be rented creates any traffic hardship or issues for that area. If and when we look to develop it, that's something we would do under a seeker for the park as to whether it makes sense to put that in. A cabin, there's no question a cabin tends to see events that are more likely to let out at the same time, for lack of a better way to put it. Whereas if I just have a pavilion with a couple picnic tables and cooking grills nearby, those tend to get used more on a, I'll call it an ad hoc basis. So you wouldn't see a large traffic dump. One of the things we can do is study between now and when we make that decision. So one of the things, I'll be clear, we would not be doing this year because of COVID. We basically wait to find out where our funds are solidified as to whether we would build a cabin there. And part of that would also be, I would want to do an analysis as to what kind of revenues do we typically see from cabins, and what would be the break-even point from those revenues to essentially cover the cost of building the cabin. The other thing, as I said, is we'd want to take a look at, would a cabin be too much impact dumping out into that area, or would we be better off with just a pavilion? But again, that's something we would be looking at down the road. Other questions?
So this road, assuming this project is approved, and that's going to be up to the planning board.
Correct.
For seeker and whatnot. But assuming this road is put in, at some point it'd be dedicated to the town to maintain, right?
Just, yes, like any other development, if they be building it up to standards. The plan always is this was a public road, not a private road. So. But again, either way, the question is, from a seeker standpoint, again, so obviously, I'm going to go to an extreme, right? If it was a facility like the Dome Arena, you couldn't put it back there because that would be way too much traffic to dump out onto Ward Hill, right? But we're not talking about the Dome Arena, we're talking about a cabin. So one of the things we would just take a look at, that was a concern that someone brought up, and it does make sense. And so what I would want to do is, between now and when we could potentially do this, I'd want to study, what kind of traffic do we see. It'd be great to do it. Almost all of our parks, they have a single, a place where we can basically check all the traffic coming out of the cabin, so we could see, what is the vehicle count for what I'll call a burst when an event lets out. Don?
Just, you do have a raised hand and a question from
Okay.
the audience.
I guess we can go to that. If I'm supposed to read that, I can't.
Says, since this subdivision is adjacent to the Lehigh Valley Trail, it certainly is crucial to have an access connection to the trail. Who will be responsible for building the actual trail connection from the subdivision to the parkland and onto the Lehigh Valley Trail, the town or the developer?
So the developer would do the initial road out of his complex. We would then take it from there to wherever we're going to do with the parking lot, any cabin pavilion, and we would be the ones who would build and maintain the connecting trails in there. You know, obviously, once the road is fully dedicated, we would be responsible for plowing and maintaining the dedicated road as well as the park road. Any connection to the trail would be done in conjunction with the Henrietta Foundation, as well as, is that New York State Parks? I'm trying to remember who the Lehigh Valley Trail itself comes under.
I know it's Henrietta Foundation, but.
The Henrietta Foundation is the local organization responsible, but I do think it's, I don't remember if it's the state or county park that covers I want to say it's the state parks that cover the whole rails to trails for that. But the point is, we would work with whatever agencies are involved with regards to that. Other questions? So
All right.
I've got, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to? I had some folks with some hands raised. Oh, Stan and Judy, they lowered their hand. I'm just going to, I'm just going to allow them. They just raised it again. I think they do want to talk. Give me just a second. Stan and Judy were first.
Okay.
They're muted.
Oops, Stan and Judy, I'm trying to unmute you, but it won't let me. Oh, there you go.
Oh, they just muted themselves again.
Now, can you?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. I'm wondering about these trails. How long are they going to be, and will I find people wandering in my backyard?
I don't know where your backyard is.
We're at the bottom of the hill.
So the trails would be, Becky, can you share the screen that has the teal and the cyan? What 200 scale? 200 scale map.
Share the screen.
She's putting it up.
Oh, putting it up. Very good. Very good. So we're at 291.
Becky, are you going to be able to share that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on it. It's coming. Oh, there we go. Got it.
Okay, so if you'll see, there's the lightest blue on the color chart. It's the top one in the legend, but it's the one in the southwest corner.
Okay.
That's the previously owned land. That's essentially where the trails would go through. So they would be more towards the center of those two parcels. I think it's actually one parcel that's, I don't know if it's two parcels or one parcel that straddles the trail, but the point is it would go essentially through the middle of that to the Lehigh Valley Trail. Again, it would probably continue down around the south side of the pond/swamp that's on the southwest side of the trail, and then loop back around to connect to the trail again, and then continue back. So there would basically be, the idea is we would look to create a loop. But again, there would be future meetings going into, in detail, the design and layout of that park once we actually have, start putting some engineering and design behind creating that. And part of that will be walking the area to see, the idea is to pick a path that would minimize the number of trees that would have to be removed, or I should say especially the minimum number of living trees. There's probably a number of dead ash trees.
Yeah, 'cause that area is pretty swampy.
It is. There's no question that area around there is swampy, which will often dictate the path that we will have to go. So again, I don't know if that's your backyard, but if you're on Ward Hill, it's nowhere near Ward Hill. The dark purple area that you see on this map,
Right.
that is a agricultural easement. It is not public land. That is private land, and he basically is giving up the right to ever develop that land. It can only be either open field or agricultural use. Now, I should point out, under New York State Ag and Market laws, under an agricultural easement, if he were to, so let's say he decided to make it a horse farm, he could put up feeding troughs, he could put up stables on there. Any agricultural structure can go within an agricultural easement, but you couldn't, for instance, put up a barn and use it as a garage. That would be against the rules. Only agricultural structures can go inside an agricultural easement. That's part of New York State Ag and Market laws, and which we fully again support. Part of the thing that, when we looked at this project, we'd actually twice effectively turned the developer down. The first time it was, he wanted to rezone it from, and I always get the zones mixed up, RR2 to RR1 or vice versa, whichever was the lower density to the higher density. We turned him down on the rezone. It actually never even came to the town board. Basically, when I polled the board, they said nobody was for it because it's working against the long-term plans of the area, which is to preserve the open space and to preserve farms. The second time was after we had done the comprehensive land use plan update. He was asking whether we could take it off of the area that limits them to the lower density. And we basically told him no, but what you could do, again, under New York State Section 278, is if he could acquire the property rights for a neighboring property, that you can do what's called clustering. So the idea is I can take all that land, I have the lower density, but I can take the number of houses, and just to make the math simple, instead of 40 houses across 100 plus acres, I can take those 40 houses, put them on half-acre lots, covering 20 acres, and put a conservation easement on the other remaining 80 acres. So that's the route he went. Part of that is in following the farmland protection plan that we put in, because one of the issues that a lot of farms have is they need to modernize, but the prices in the markets for farms are just so low that they can't generate the capital other than to go into debt. The interest rates on that debt, because it's often non-secured, are very high and essentially can drive farms under. And so one of the things the Farmland Protection Plan was looking at is what are ways that farmers can get revenue, they can get capital in order to do their modernization so that they're not burdened by that debt. And one of the ideas in there was exactly this, that, they're able to sell their land development rights, for lack of a better way to put it, to an adjacent developer who can then develop in that clustered, but it preserves the additional acreage. And if everybody were to build by this standard with over 80% free, there would be a ton of open space in Henrietta. So again, I get it that people don't want to see any development in the southern portions of town, but property owners do have rights themselves. And as long as they're working within the zoning laws, they can exercise those rights. And one of the things that is allowed under New York State is to do this clustering. Again, it does preserve over 80 acres of open space, including that farmland. So again, if you live near that purple, that will remain private land. It's the conservation, again, that is not becoming public land. The part that is becoming public land is the teal color to the west of that. The light cyan is already public land. And the teal to the north of that and to the west of the purple, that's what's going to become, would become public land if we decide to accept that. There's one other conservation easements in there. You'll see it's in the light green. There's a couple other, there's a pink one. They're kind of narrow and hard to see. Those actually, again, are also over private land. Rather than take on green belts, which are problematic, the narrow green belts are problematic for the town to maintain. I asked the developer to instead incorporate those conservation easements into people's backyards. So they would be part of people's backyards. They essentially would control their buffering. They could plant trees in there. They could put hedgerows, evergreens, whatever they wanted. What they can't do is build structures there. So no permanent structures, no swimming pools, no garages, sheds, stuff like that. You know, they could have a picnic table back there, but not something that's actually a structure built into the property. So in addition, what the developer agreed to do is for the people right on Ward Hill near it, because a lot of people want control of the buffering between them and a new development. We have offered to those, I think it's 4 property owners, that they can have that land added to their parcels. And so they are making that decision as to whether they want to do that or not. But again, the idea, and the developer was willing to do it. We thought it was beneficial for those who had an interest in wanting that buffer land, that they would be able to do it. So, but the only one that again is looking to become the public land is the teal. We're not considering any other land for public land.
So is there a time limit on when those people
Farmland.
can say if they want this land or not? Buffering?
There is, but I don't know that we've set a deadline. We've heard back from 1 or 2 of them, but at some point we're going to have to give them a drop dead date to make a decision.
So we kind of talked about traffic, and I'm not so sure with the traffic studies that we've tried to do that it satisfies what traffic will really be with this particular subdivision. And I'm not so sure that it won't cause a lot of traffic.
Well, so before we go heavily into the traffic, let's save that for the second phase. Let's continue the business of the public land.
Okay, well, traffic was brung up, so that's why.
I was just pointing out that any traffic regard from the park itself would be done as part of the park seeker down the road. It's not part of this project. And if it proved that the traffic was an issue from that park, we wouldn't do that park development.
So this land that's been offered to these 4 homeowners, if they choose to accept this land, this is theirs to do with what they want. If they want to build on it.
No, they can't build on it. It has to be conservation. So
Okay.
they could keep it, you know, again, they could plant trees, hedges, arborvitaes, whatever they wanted in that regards to separate it. They could let it go fallow field. They could mow it. They could put a picnic table there, stuff like, you know, what they can't put in is a permanent structure.
But it does become part of their parcel.
It does become part of their parcel. So,
Are you ready to hear from Karen, who has her hand raised?
sure.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so I have basically 4 questions or issues. I live at 231 Ward Hill, which if you're looking at the map where the purple comes out and there's the little part that comes out to Ward Hill, I'm adjacent to that little purple part. Traffic is already an issue on our street, and you know, as we've brought up, but the traffic study that was shared by the builder is old and really needs to be updated. It's difficult to see oncoming traffic. We have pedestrians that try and walk up and over the hill. It's very difficult to see them. There was already an accident with somebody exiting from the road that he proposed where someone was almost killed. So it's concerning to me that we're now going to have a proposed additional almost 100 cars per day going up and down my street. So that's my first concern with this. My second concern deals with the changes of the character of the neighborhood. We bought this house 17 years ago where it was extremely rural. Yes, we're in Henrietta and we understand that we're in Henrietta, but it was very rural. The changes to the lot size were made for a reason, and to allow the patios and the clustering is going to change all the nature of our street. My question also comes from the donation of the land by the builder. Are you ever really going to be able to build a cabin on swampland? I mean, that land is very wet back there. And I just don't see it as being usable. So therefore, how is that a benefit to the town? And that landing strip that's required is just going to be another thing that's going to change the character of our neighborhood. You know, what the fire access road that they're requiring, I mean, that's just hideous. And at some point, it's going to impact my taxes if you're going to build stuff back there and increase the traffic out onto my road. So it's really not a benefit to me as a homeowner. The third issue that I have is drainage. I have a humongous drainage problem as it is. I'm at the very bottom of the hill. All the water drains to my backyard. The builder has stated that the drainage will or should be improved, but yet he hasn't said how. 1/3 of the homes, when we looked at the last map that we were shown, showed that the drainage will not be going into the retention pond, going in, which directly impacts my property. And my concern is that this builder has not fixed drainage problem for people who paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars to build them homes. I'm just Joe Schmo up the street, and past practice is a really good predictor of future practice. And so my concern is a very big concern is around the drainage problems that I already have being worsened. And then as I look at the map that you just shared with the purple, it's a landlocked agricultural thing. How will the farmers be actually getting back there? Will they be now driving next to my house to get back there on that access point?
Isn't that an existing farm?
It's rented farm right now, but I don't know how they get back there. And once it goes, how do they even get back there? And I don't know the answer to that question.
This development, to my knowledge, is not changing the farm itself.
There's an access, you can see it on the map. There's a little blue hitch that goes out.
Well, and
that's my house. That's my house. There has never been a farmer that has gone down that. And my concern is, are you going to turn that into an access point?
And the 5-acre parcel out front is part of that farm. He just didn't want the agricultural easement over it in case he wanted to build a bigger garage. That's his residence parcel. So my point is, presumably they're getting back there today.
Right, through that parcel. So if he sells that parcel and they build on it, how does that become? I'm just saying right now, if you look at that, it's a landlocked agricultural piece.
Oh, so it's not landlocked. It does have a strip out. And I will again point out that that is irrespective of this development. He could sell that parcel off at any time, completely irrespective of this development. You could do that tomorrow. There's nothing to keep him from breaking out that 5-acre lot and selling it individually. So that has nothing to do with this development.
So
I understand that concern. As far as the other stuff, I've written them down and I'm going to address them later because again, I want to focus on the park stuff. So again, for people raising hand, if you could keep it with related to the park stuff for now, and then I will bring up, once we've essentially finished that portion, we will hear additional comments. But I've written them down because I will address those when we switch.
So is the agricultural easement, that's not within our purview?
The agricultural easement is not within our purview.
Okay.
That's part of New York State ag and market laws. You couldn't stop it if you wanted to. Any other questions? Yep.
There aren't any addition, oh, sorry, from the,
I'm coming up to the mic. Go ahead.
Steve, sorry, I came in a little late. I'm not sure if you said this, but this land here, the log trail.
oh, Steve, we can't hear what this gentleman is saying.
So the gentleman is Joe Hornak. Go ahead.
So what I was asking was the light blue area.
Yep.
Adjacent to the trail and, what is it, Long Trail?
Correct.
Development. Is that the area now that you're saying is going to be public?
It already is public.
Public land?
It is public land today. So the idea was that from the darker blue, from the more teal color, we would run a loop trail that goes over to the Lehigh Valley Trail and back. So that access to the Lehigh Valley Trail can be made from this new parkland.
So my question is, if a concern is added traffic to this proposed parkland off of Ward Hill Road, is a possible issue because of the hill, et cetera, et cetera. Since you guys have that land, why couldn't an access road be put to East Henrietta Road?
Because unfortunately, when they laid that out, they didn't provide, that wasn't really set up that way, unfortunately. To my knowledge, is there any frontage of that? Does that teal, or does the cyan actually meet? Is there any frontage on East Henrietta Road?
So
No.
Cyan doesn't meet East Henrietta Road, to the best of my knowledge, but Long Trail is a public road, correct? Why couldn't a road be taken off of that around the south or the north, go over to the park? Just a suggestion.
So the biggest answer to that is because, again, on the southwest side, it is swampy. So if we did anything, it would be more likely to be a bike path or a walking path out that way. But for actual vehicles, I had looked at that in the past. And from the width of, if you look, it's pretty narrow to the north of Long Branch Trail. Between that and the adjacent property, we had looked at this prior, before this development ever landed in front of me, or I guess more technically it was after we had turned it down the first or second time. But I was looking at that from that land over in Long Branch, and there wasn't, from an engineering standpoint, it would have to essentially be a single lane road in some areas, which of course is dangerous from people going into and out of the park. So the answer to why we wouldn't have access to the cabin from that side, it's just, unfortunately, the way that was laid out, they didn't really provide a good means for that to do that, which is why when he was laying, and to be honest, he didn't have that in this one either. We went to the developer and said, look, if we're going to do this, can you open up a road between two of your properties? And essentially he shifted his properties around in order to open up that access. But, again, there's unfortunately no good way to get vehicular traffic in off of Long Branch over on into that area to where we could put a cabin back there. I had looked at that a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. So, thank you. Any other questions, comments on the park itself?
Steve, can you hang on a second? We can't hear the folks at the podium.
Mike.
Yeah, use that mic.
It's on.
Just speak closer to it.
Just gotta be close.
No.
How about now? Is that better?
If we're going to use that one, we need to put
Use the
a,
mic. Use that mic, yeah.
well, hold on a second. We're going to put a microphone cover on it. There you go. It's a little shower cap.
You gotta hold it real close. We can't hear you.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's close.
That's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Benjamin Skomsky. I live at 16 Long Branch, which is immediately north of the proposed Forest View subdivision. I don't think it comes as any surprise to anybody that in the broadest sense, I'm against this project. But since we're talking about open space, I'm going to confine my remarks to that and
hopefully have an opportunity later to address
You will.
the other issues. And I think even if this goes through, we have an obligation to get this right. And as far as the open spaces present themselves,
Please hold the mic up.
I know, I'm sorry. It's not used to being in a starring role here. But the concerning part about the open space to me is that once the development is done, and we're talking about 46 units that are selling at approximately $320,000. So the developer is going to gross about $14.7 million and an expense ratio of, you know, if you're saying very conservatively, he only makes 20% on that. That's still a number of millions of dollars in which the developer is benefiting from this. And then once that is done, we have this open land that becomes a liability to him. It's a liability for the stormwater management. It's a liability for the taxes. And if we accept that as a town, we're taking that off the tax roll, and we are then responsible for the stormwater, the maintenance of the stormwater management facility. So it seems to me that this is almost, in a sense, a corporate welfare to basically give a subsidy to a development that's asking for a benefit that they entirely reap themselves. I think there are a number of other problems, and it goes back to the 2018 Agricultural Development and Farmland Protection Plan through the comprehensive protection, or I'm sorry, the comprehensive plan in 2019. A statistic from the 2018 Farmland Protection Plan had a survey of Henrietta residents, and 98%, that's no joke, that's in the statistics.
I'm familiar with it.
98% called for maintaining agricultural lands very important. So I think that gives the board a sense of what that means in very real terms, especially here. And one of the things in the 2018 protection plan really thought innovatively about the use of transfers of development rights. And in the index of that, they talked about the use of the transfers of development rights from these priority farmlands that they deemed, which include this land, to use the development rights there to allow density boosts up by RIT, up in the more populated, more condensed portions. And that's smart, that's good government. And instead, what is being proposed here is the transfer of development rights from one piece of farmland to an adjacent piece of farmland that essentially has the effect of only protecting half. When in really, you know, you can use this in any way possible. That certainly, makes sense. But when it was talked about in the 2018 plan, it was talked about in a sense.
Please keep the microphone in front of your mouth.
I apologize. It was talked about in a sense that allowed the preservation of more farmland. And it seems incongruous to use this proposal or this idea that is a very good idea that does help protect farmland to essentially cut the farmland in half in this particular instance. And so I think from that perspective, this is a bad deal for the town. And I think the board, if the proposal does make it through the planning board, should decline to accept the land. So I'll, again, hopefully get a chance to speak later about the other matters. But
so I'll just make it clear that we are not doing this through transfer of development rights. I mean, I use that language, but it's being done through New York State clustering laws. We are in the process of putting in the code for transfer of development rights per the 2018 and other documents. And by the way, that survey, to my knowledge, was actually from 2011. It was cited in the 2018 plan, but it was during the comprehensive land use update. The two subjects that got the largest return was the preservation of the agricultural land as well as open space and the preserving our cultural heritage, including that agricultural heritage. So That's what the Farmland Protection Plan was trying to achieve. And, you know, and again, that's largely what is essentially going on here. I will note that one of the things that you run into an issue of, you know, we get this a lot with any development. Why did you put the development here? We didn't, right? We don't get to say, okay, you want to build a Burger King, you can build it at this lot or this lot or that lot. That's not how it works, right? We create zoning laws and say what can and can't go there. We can't force people to farm, right? So this land, to my knowledge, I don't know, does anyone have an idea as to the last time it was actually actively farmed? (2006) And I'm not talking about the purple area, I'm talking about the other area, right? So, you know, the thing, obviously, we'd love to have some of that. A lot of people who were longtime farmers have gotten out of the farmer business, or they got out of the farm business in Henrietta, right? A perfect example of that is Mr. Howlett, right? It just, we can create incentives, we can create protection plans, we can create stuff that help in that regards. We cannot force, right? People have constitutionally protected rights, especially New York State constitutionally protected rights with regards to the land use. This is being done, again, under New York State law, which supersedes town law. It's done under clustering. So because they're adjacent parcels, as long as both property owners sign into the clustering agreement, they can do that. And what that New York State clustering says is, I can take all the lands that would have been spread across all of the acreage, I can cluster them together as long as I put a conservation easement on the remainder and cannot build there. And so that's what effectively this is doing. As far as stormwater maintenance, in every single development in town, the town takes it over. In fact, it's the one or two where people keep it as a private drive and keep those in there. I'll tell you, it's more problematic for the town than when we take it over, because it gets into problems invariably. So the original people who build it may have agreed to that, but invariably they sell their house and the new people come in and say, well, why doesn't the town fix this? Why doesn't the town take care of that drainage pond? Why doesn't the town take care of that? And it becomes a real problem because, of course, they haven't set up easements, so we don't have a way to get our vehicles back there. We don't have a way to flush the system. There's a whole lot of issues with that. In that regards, it makes more sense for the town to take the drainage. And, you know, as far as the maintenance of the pond in terms of whether it's green or that type of stuff, yeah, that typically does fall where it will end up. Just so to be clear, the developer doesn't stick with it. It becomes part of an HOA. They create a homeowners association. So the property owners are the ones who maintain that in the long run. It's not the developer who sticks around and takes care of that. So the idea that us taking the park is corporate welfare isn't accurate. Now, one of the things that we've said is, and we do recognize that there is a savings to the developer to do that, or to because again, with those HOA fees, it's really more accurately the people buying the homes, right? So it helps them sell their homes. The developer doesn't have the long-term maintenance requirements, but they'll create an HOA, which is an additional expense, which makes it more difficult to sell the homes. But with that said, you know, as towards one of that thing, that's why we're having them put in the initial road, and to put in the connection for run the water out there, and to put in the connection where we could, if we decide to go with a sewer instead of a septic, if we put bathrooms out there, we'd have that ability. So there are things that the developer is doing to make this park possible if we take it. And so it's not corporate welfare, it's an exchange of saying, right, in order for us to be able to put this there and do so at a cost-effective manner and not, right? So the town isn't they're not using taxpayer money to acquire land to build a town park. They're not using taxpayer money to build the access road and to get the water out there. So it's a way for the town to cost effectively build a new park without having to spend a lot of taxpayer dollars to do so.
And I certainly understand a lot of the things that you were talking about, but I think I want to zero in. It is an exchange, and it is an exchange where we as the town hold all the cards. So why shouldn't we ask for a better deal? Why shouldn't we ask for these easements to shift more responsibility off the town and more responsibility onto either the developers or the homeowners or the people who are invested in this property? Why spread that expense? So
we did that for almost all of them except for that one teal park. The purple, the town has no maintenance in that whatsoever. The Larkin family, that's their responsibility. The green and the pink and the orange, those are all the adjacent property owners. They are the ones responsible for that. That's one of the things that's happened in the past where the town takes on these green belts, which really don't have a whole lot of benefit to the greater community as a whole. It does to those individual property owners.
Completely agree.
Or that small neighborhood, and yet the town is the one who takes care of those. So again, as part of that, we're changing that. We are not taking those. We are not taking them as public land. They're going to stay private.
For sure.
And so the only part we're taking is the parkland, which again, I want that I envision it being an actual park where people can go and play. You know, most likely be a small playground there. There will most likely be a restroom, and again, potentially a pavilion or a cabin. As well as, again, then the trails into the other currently already public land that was previously taken.
All right, thank you.
Comments regarding that? And again, you'll have a chance to come back up for the other stuff. Any other questions, comments with regards to the park?
We got a question for the audience too.
What's that?
I don't know, we got a question from the viewers, but.
I know there's a lot of people waiting for the part 2 of this meeting.
While we're waiting, I'll just read you this from on question and answer on the internet. Says the pond in the new development could flood Woodridge Trail homes and should not be allowed as it risks safety of people and homes.
So we also received such a letter through the email. If this were a dam, there'd be some fear of that. There isn't. This is being dug down in the ground. The only way that potentially happens is if the huge areas of the land give way. That could happen today, arguably, but the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. And if it is happening, the least of your issues is the pond, because that means there's some sort of massive sinkhole underneath your property. So I received that note about the risk of the pond flooding the homes. I just don't in any way see that as a possibility. I will note that there is already currently a drainage path that goes out that way. This pond will actually reduce the amount of water that runs off down that path during a storm. It doesn't reduce the volume, it reduces the rate. So it's essentially, it's a detention pond, which basically means it holds the water back in a storm and lets it out at a controlled rate so that it's not all racing downstream. But again, that is where the water flows today. They're not changing that. They are capturing more of it and letting it out at a slower rate. So it should help with downstream flooding that is present today. Go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer Black, 167 Long Branch Drive. I just wanted to make a couple notes. One, I can't think of any real place, even in town, where there is a pavilion or a cabin within a neighborhood. It just seems odd. It seems weird
Look
to
up
have.
park. Breeze Park.
Okay, then let's keep it to here. Like, we're in a, in a residential neighborhood, and you're talking about putting a park where there could be a bathroom, where we already in Henrietta have homeless people going and using those bathrooms and sleeping in those bathrooms, or going there first thing in the morning and washing up. And you're adding that to Henrietta, to a residential neighborhood.
All of our parks are in residential neighborhoods, every single one of
No.
them.
Yeah, but you don't have to go through a development to get into the
Martin
park.
Road is,
No, I've been to Martin Road a lot. There's houses across the street, but you're not going through the development to get into the pavilion or into the park. I just think you're adding a ton more traffic. You're adding.
what about all the schools that are in that exact same scenario that you do have to go
I'm not
through
really here
those?
to argue the fact. I'm just here to tell you what my concern is
Okay.
about it. Thank you.
Yep.
I have one thing to say. Ben came up, Skansky, and the letters that I've received about this project, it's not that people don't want to have it developed. It's that they don't want twice as many homes there, and that the 5-acre lot limit is what they expected. And now this clustering is taking it to 50 homes, 46 homes. So that's really the problem that people have. And they're concerned about flooding and the mitigation of this developer because of past practices. So people have those real concerns. That's what the concerns are.
Yep, I understand that. Any other comments about the park? Yep. Coming up.
One should I use?
Use the one that you can hold. That one works better.
This one? Is it on?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'll speak up. Marty Miller, 109 Ward Hill Road. First, I'd like to make a correction. I moved into my house in March of 2013. That field was actively farmed behind my house. 2 years later, it was still actively being farmed. So that's at least 2015, not 2006. I spoke directly to the farmer that was renting it, Steve Van Voorhis. Williams Road, Henrietta, New York. That's his base of operations.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So I'm making a correction on that. Now to the parkland issue. Are you guys familiar at all with the linear trail? You
With
walk
which?
it on a regular basis.
Which trail?
The linear trail, Lehigh Valley Trail.
Lehigh Valley Trail?
Yep.
North Branch?
Former railroad.
Yep.
Yes.
You know that there's dirt bikes and four-wheelers going back there on a regular basis.
Yep. In fact, we just,
Yeah, the police were.
working with the Monroe County Sheriff, we just,
So this
Ticketed
parkland
a
that's being
couple people.
proposed is going to be an additional spot for them to run around on then if it's not policed.
if, again, as we already know, they have absolutely zero issue getting on the trail.
Correct.
So I'm not going to say, well, we should never build any other park that connects to this because people could get on from a dirt bike, because again, they're already getting on, and we are already working on trying to catch them and prevent them from doing such.
Okay, so that's up to Monroe County, not the town of Henrietta?
Monroe County, we have
Sheriff's
no
Department.
police for it, as a sheriff's department. But they have been working with us, and again, they did just recently apprehend a number of individuals who had been riding dirt bikes on the trail.
Okay, so if you take that Lehigh Valley Trail and you head towards the thruway, right, so directionally going north toward the city, you're going to find all kinds of trails back in there where those dirt bikes can come in from.
Yep.
So
The
what was
old,
what was the proposed Belfry Golf Course that unfortunately failed? That's their new playground. So they're back there tearing around on a regular basis. So unless you're going to police those openings and offshoots where they can come in from, it's going to be incredibly difficult, virtually impossible, to keep them out.
They also get in where the main power lines intersect the trail. They come in from under the power lines and get in that way too.
So it seems like it's a lot of Swiss cheese holes you're trying to plug here.
I'm not necessarily trying to plug all those holes, because you can't possibly plug all those holes. You have to look at
So
it
that's a
more from an
potential
enforcement
liability right
standpoint.
there with these individuals messing around back and they're not using the parkland on the trail for what it's proposed to be.
But again, that exists whether this development happens or not.
Correct, but you're adding additional playground for them by taking this on.
arguably. We don't generally see a whole lot. So the trail also goes right through Veterans Memorial Park. I don't see a whole lot of dirt bikes there. The trail went right next to my house on the corner of Lehigh and John Street. Never saw dirt bikes and trails there. So there's a lot of places where the trail
The more
goes.
secluded it is, the more likely that they are to show up because of the less chance of apprehension.
So right now it's pretty secluded.
Correct.
So,
So you're adding essentially, like I said, additional playground for them.
well, you're arguably though, by your own argument, by adding the town park there, I'm not making it less secluded, therefore less likely that they'll show up there.
Okay.
As I said, we have stepped up enforcement, or more accurately, we've been working with the sheriff's department to ask them to step up enforcement of the motorized vehicles on the Lehigh Valley Trail.
Since this park is not yet in existence or anything along those lines, but potentially, if and when it gets developed, a number of parks have closed at night and have a gate across the closing that might discourage motorized vehicles from going back there.
Yeah, I would agree in that regards. This would be similar to the other parks, you know, again, especially the ones in the residential neighborhoods like Breeze Park, which is off of a residential street. Martin Road Park, which is off of what's typically referred to as a collector type road. Most of the parks do have gates, and we do go around at night and close the parks. We certainly lock the bathrooms at night. You know, again, those precautions are taken. Any other comments, questions regarding the park? Okay.
I have a couple questions. How far exactly is the road going to be developed for the park?
You know that answer, Peter?
Peter Vars from BME Associates on behalf of the applicant. The road would be extended about 180 feet off the road. It's going to get extended to the rear of the proposed lots. And that would be paved, and it would be of a width to allow two-way traffic and pedestrian access also.
Okay.
The water service will be extended also to the rear of the lot. So basically it's there ready to be picked up in the future for the future development proposal.
Okay, so then we would be responsible for continuing the road on back if there's going to be any pavilion or anything like that developed.
Correct.
And I noticed that the roads are not, it doesn't look like they're directly across from each other. It looks like you'd have to go onto the residential road a little bit in order to get access to the cabin area.
Just to be clear, that what looks like an extension of the cabin road, that's not. That's actually a new building code. Under the new building code, developments over a certain number of units have to have a secondary access or be sprinklered.
I see.
And so that's part of New York State requirement, not the town's.
Okay, great. So the traffic from
But
the.
that road would not be an active road. That would be crash gate.
Correct.
Used for emergency vehicles only.
Up there.
Mhm.
It
Okay.
would be plowed.
Yes.
And the retention pond, is that part of the park area?
It will be located on the lands being offered in dedication to the town of Henrietta, but it will be constructed and installed by the developer as part of the development's infrastructure. So it'd be constructed. Our office is responsible for certifying that it was constructed per design. That's provided to town staff for their to review. There's basically an as-built map, and then the town approves the acceptance of the dedication of that facility that was constructed correctly.
Okay. My only concern there is that a lot of times sometimes those retention ponds become kind of stagnant. Is there any recirculation or anything like that to keep the water from stagnating?
So the primary factor that allows that water to turn over is the drainage area that drains to the pond. The DEC has some guidelines for that. This pond's going to receive an area of around 48 acres draining south and west into it. Basically, DEC tells you to have a 10-to-1 ratio, 10 acres of drainage area for every 1 acre of surface area. This pond's about 2 acres in size. So we actually have almost 2.5 times the drainage area flowing to that pond as recommended by DEC to turn that water over. The design of the pond itself is contoured to encourage or to facilitate the turnover of water. There's shallow pools, there's deep water pools, those types of things, so that the water that comes in flushes out the deeper pool water and pushes that out the outlet. So there is a lot of research that's been done over decades by DEC to establish those parameters, and this design's been done to meet those.
Okay.
As far as whether we wanted to put a fountain of something along those lines, obviously if we have a cabin back there with power, we could in theory do that. But you know, that would be one of those I would want to see what happens with the turnover, the natural turnover that occurs, as to whether it's worth putting something like that in. But we could certainly do that if it became problematic.
Okay. Thank you.
What's that?
No, exactly where is the discharge for that pond when you say that?
So what we did with this
Oh,
design.
Peter,
Yes?
I'm sorry, I can't see from here. Which screen should I put up?
Do you want the post-development drainage map, please?
The proposed drainage?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That's it. That's it. So as you see here, the lines outlined in yellow are the current drainage pathways out of this land today. The large part of this area drains south and west. There's an existing culvert in this area here that allows the water to bypass. Then there's a culvert under this roadway here, and then it finds its way to further to the south and west. So the proposed pond here will have an outlet that will discharge the pond water through this area, where then it will enter the existing drainage way here. That's been reviewed by town staff and the town's consulting engineer. And actually, I think their most recent comments to the planning board, don't quote me on this date, but I think they were around June 18th or whatever. The town's consulting engineer has verified that that outlet path is a viable pathway. And as the supervisor mentioned, and that's what this table summarizes, is the rate of outflow from this pond in post-development condition will actually be about a 50% reduced rate of runoff than what currently is entering this drainage way and going through this culvert and leaving the property. That's the function of this detention basin. It takes the post-development runoff volume, it holds it back, it controls its discharge through the engineered outlet structure so that the rate of discharge leaving the site is at a reduced rate of runoff, basically, so it's not exceeding the capacity of the downstream drainage area.
The rate would be reduced.
Correct.
It would be more continuous, right? Obviously, if you had, I mean.
Correct, and
Right.
I'm gonna go someplace. This was pre-COVID. Literally, in drainage terms, you actually flatten the curve. I kid you not. But think of that. During runoff existing, if you were to model the runoff, it is a sharp bell curve that basically you peak quickly and then it drops off. Drainage design for decades has been to take that peak of that curve, flatten it, and then letting it trail out so that it discharges at a lower rate, so you're not exceeding the carrying capacity of the downstream facilities, but yes, it's going to run a little continuously. The program I use when I teach at Monroe County Planning is the best way I can explain that to you is think of a bathtub. The water comes in quickly, the tub holds the water to allow the drain to drain it out slowly so it doesn't overwhelm your drainage system coming out of your house. That's exactly what this does. So that's the basic principles of stormwater design going back for decades. And that's what this model is based on. All those calculations have been provided to staff in the town engineers report to meet all the criteria of not only the town standards, but the DEC standards also.
So in conjunction with the building of the properties, when will the pond be built? Will that be built first?
The pond is one of the very first things actually constructed because it is at the downstream end. So it is to collect the runoff from once even the construction work starts. It collects that runoff to control it, hold back silt, things like that to control its discharge. It's one of the first things built.
Okay. That was what I had.
Any other questions on that?
Can I ask a quick question about the access to the farmland? Because I'm looking here at the Google Maps and that area that looks like it's providing access to the agricultural easement on the blue. Yeah, on Google Maps, that looks like that's not currently being used as the entrance to that particular field. That looks like it's just essentially somebody's yard.
So again, I suspect what you're seeing, and if one of the farmers in the area can say otherwise, that part that in the upper right corner of that purple, there's a 5-acre lot.
Yeah.
That is the Larkin property.
Yes.
He didn't want the conservation easement over that 5-acre lot so that he could, again, expand his house, put up a larger garage, do other stuff that wouldn't be allowed under an agricultural easement.
Yes.
But that is still the access by which he gets to his farm.
Okay.
The point of this lot 47, the 5-acre lot, is to afford him all of the rights he has of the fact that this is a property zoned rural residential. So while he is willing to place the conservation easement on the large bulk of this land to restrict its use such that it can only be used for agricultural purposes and the purposes, he's retained the 5 acres, and any use of that 5 acres will be governed by the rural residential zoning law in place. And thus it's likely it still would be the main point of access or would continue to be used for access. But he wanted the flexibility, rightfully so, that what is allowed in the rural residential zone, he would be able to do on this lot. It is a conforming lot to the rural residential zone.
But I think one of the concerns might be is right off a ward in between the two houses, it appears that there's now an access. So if somebody, let's say.
But that's there today, just so you know.
Correct.
That is there today.
Okay.
That hasn't changed. He's
Right.
just made it part of that portion. So again, what would happen is from a seeker standpoint, if he goes and tries to do something with that 5 acre to separate it from the farm and do the whole 9 yards, then he has to look at, that's when they would take a look at, is that access road going to create issues? And we do see that in some areas today. When they created Martin Road Park, there was a shared access road for the farm back there that runs by someone's house, and it causes issues for them. And we're looking to see if there's some way to resolve that. But, right now, again, that's not changing today. That's coming through that property. And one of the things that we would look at if he ever decides to separate that out as part of that process, that's where you would basically say you can't adversely affect the neighbors there. You've got to figure out some way to do it in such a manner to still allow access back there if he's going to continue to farm. And that could be a shared driveway access through that 5-acre lot. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. He doesn't need to solve that problem now. That becomes an issue if he ever decides to subdivide that out.
And the last thing I would add to that, since there's no driveway there now, if he were to propose a new one, he'd have to obtain a permit from Monroe County to do so. Okay, and thus it would have to be safe. And the county would render that decision.
Right, and that's one of the other things I will note, that it's a county road, so the county is the one rendering the traffic considerations. But that's to Peter's point, because there isn't a curb access there today, it's a lot access, so it's not a landlocked parcel. But because there's no curb access, they would have to get that. And I can tell you, as someone who got a curb access on a former farm field, it's not easily done. They put you through the ringer. So.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.
Don, since we're going to be covering stuff that's not pertinent to this public hearing, should I close the official public hearing and then just
Open public comment.
have an open public comment for the
Sure.
rest?
Yep.
Okay.
I do see there's 2 more Q&As here. Let me
Okay.
see. All right, I'll read it to you. Mike says, has the town engineer cleared the pond in the new development? Residents were warned about flooding. That seems like a later public comment question. And then it also says, anonymous attendee says, this map looks like Ward Hill Road will need to be ripped up, areas in red, for drainage. Who will be paying for that?
No, what the area in red on the map that was shared, what that is showing, in fact, Becky, could you bring up the current drainage? And Peter's going to flip the one here. So that is showing, one of the things we had asked from a drainage standpoint was there were concerns from the neighbors of drainage on Ward Hill Road that a bunch of the water there today was causing issues in their front yard. And so when we heard those issues, we went to the developer and to Peter and said, can you engineer this so that you reduce the amount of water that is running down Ward Hill Road? So this is showing, that red is showing, that's the water, that's the portion of the existing parcel today that drains to Ward Hill. The purple is the part that drains out the southwest, down that stream, out the southwest corner of the property. And now can you switch to the proposed? And so as you'll notice, the amount of red has been greatly reduced. So there's a lot less water that will be draining to Ward Hill, and therefore the residents along Ward Hill should see an improvement in their the amount of water running down the swale alongside Ward Hill and into the front of their properties. Instead, that water is being carried out through the stream, and again, it's going into the retention pond so as to reduce the rate at which it flows out down that stream to prevent downstream issues in that direction. So, you know, the plan that they put forth is designed to improve the drainage for the adjacent areas, not make it worse. Obviously, you never want it to make it worse, but the point is, in addition to, they went beyond being neutral, they went to where they made improvements for areas that were not fully affected by their development. So, you know, again, that was in response to requests from the town based off feedback from residents at prior meetings. Yep. Well, does it have to do with the park, or is it, if not, I'll call you up in 2 seconds. Okay. Okay, so is there any other comments regarding to the park? Okay, hearing no further comments, I'm going to call the public hearing for the proposed forest view cluster subdivision, lands available for conservation easement and open space, public hearing to a close. We are now going to take additional public comments. I will let you start with the drainage, and then I'm going to go into one of the very first questions, the list of stuff that that resident brought to us.
Thank you, Steve. Patty Brill, I am on the town planning board. And I was hoping you can kind of enlighten me. I know I personally have gotten quite a few emails, text messages, et cetera, with residents in the Branch Brook and Long Branch neighborhoods that had unexpected drainage issues that came about. And their comments to me were that they did not receive feedback, or the builder didn't come back and help me fix this. I want to know, what is the responsibility of the builder for, I know engineering practices are done for proper drainage to help mitigate that. If there's unforeseen drainage that comes up, what is the time length and things like that, just for everyone's knowledge? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we have a precarious situation here where you have a planning board member who's addressing this application, asking what I would say is a legal question to the town board. I don't know that this is really the appropriate avenue to address that issue.
Okay. So I would say from a legal standpoint, you should talk to Dan Mastrella in that regards, who's the planning board attorney, or you could talk to Don, who's the town board attorney. I'll just say, one of the things that in terms of past issues, so a couple things, people ask, what is the town typically? So, when we look at stuff and they put in the drainage system, they're, again, a firm who is licensed engineers with respect to doing drainage design the system, and it's the developer's obligation to put it in as approved by the town. If it is not, then we have the ability to say you need to remedy the issue. In terms of that area, I don't know the details of it in terms of, it happened before I was in office. It's happened a long time ago. I don't know if the issues were because it wasn't installed properly, or if there were, so it could be, was it not graded properly so that the water wasn't running to where it was supposed to be? Were there not drains put in? Were there just changes that happened that were unforeseen and have caused additional issues? Was it settling that has occurred since then? There's a lot of different sources by which those problems can occur. In terms of, one of the things I will note is that a lot of the obligations of a developer to their homeowner is what I'll call commercial, and that is handled through civil action and not through the town. So if you sign a contract, if they're not meeting your contract law, that you need to remedy that through contract law, not through the town. Now, with that said, like I said, our obligation, and correct me where I strayed on, is to make it that it is, our engineering department has inspectors who go in to make sure that the plans are developed, or, the project is developed in accordance with the approved plans by the town. And so if they find that it's out of compliance, they then work with them to get it in compliance.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that the law is pretty clear that a municipality is not a guarantor of land development. When you think about what the municipality is doing, they're looking at the development of the land. They're looking at where, where houses go, access, traffic, and so on and so forth. There's building permits that are issued as well to make sure that buildings are up to code, and certificates of occupancy that come later down the road. There are practices, there are requirements that need to be engaged in order to go through these reviews. But at the end of the day, if those reviews are secured and approved, at that point, again, the law is clear that the municipality is not a guarantor of land development, which I think is what the supervisor is getting at. Is at some point it becomes a civil action between two private parties if they're not pleased with the transaction that they engaged in relative to, say, the purchase of a house.
There are ways that people can mitigate against stuff like that. Sometimes there are home warranties or there's insurance. There are some other things that happen with relative to public improvements that also protect homeowners. Letters of credit to ensure sewer water is constructed properly. Roads need to be constructed properly, or else a municipality can act against a letter of credit. Sometimes drainage infrastructure is also protected with a letter of credit. But drainage issues tend to be universal. They're happening all over. Weather changes over time, and people do different things to their private property after they obtain it. That changes drainage patterns. Drainage is a difficult thing to address, but the developer has a professional firm. The DEC has standards. The town reviews the proposal, and I think there may be a letter of credit with respect to drainage infrastructure.
Anything that is being dedicated to the town has a letter of credit, and the funds aren't released until essentially it passes standards. So that's roads, sidewalks, sewer, and any of those types of utilities, structures. That's basically, it serves two purposes. One, it's sort of a carrot or a stick, depending on how you want to look at it, to get the developer to finish getting the infrastructure built and built properly. The second thing is if the developer ever walks away, which has happened, that it gives the town the ability to go in and fix it without expending taxpayer money. So that's typically why you see the letters of credit and even retainage. So one of the things that happens is even after it's been approved, there's typically some retainage or a maintenance bond that basically covers, because typically if you're going to see problems, you're going to see them in the first year or two. So there's typically like I said, either retainage or a maintenance bond that covers those costs if repairs do need to be made. In terms of, as Don was saying, there's so much stuff that changes and affects drainage that, as people put in swimming pools or they do various things, they're essentially changing the drainage on their yard, which of course does have some effect on other areas. Typically, if there's a engineered drainage swale, we'll have an easement over that. So people, I will say, can't put stuff in that. That doesn't mean they still don't. But for instance, we just had an issue where we were having drainage air problems in a neighborhood because somebody had essentially put a garden and a shed in their drainage swale and essentially created a dam. So we went in and got them to clear it out because we have a drainage easement there. So in some areas you can do that. If it's just in their yard, over time land settles and or people, do additional grading, do additional changes. One of the things that we look at is, as I've spoken to in the past, when we're looking at this type of stuff, and again, we're not, the town board is not the ones who have the approval or denial of the project. It is the planning board. We can look at traffic, we can look at character of neighborhood, we can look at, drainage and a whole bunch of other stuff from the seeker. One of the things that we cannot look at is what I'll call character of the developer. If people have had past issues, that needs to be resolved in civil actions. One of the things I will note, I can't think of a single developer in town who hasn't had issues. If we could somehow say, nope, if you have any issues, you can't develop in town, there'd be no development. Now, I know there's a lot of people who, once they live here, would love to see that. That's one of the things you hear all the time. I don't want to see any development in this area because it's farmland. Well, what's your house built on, right? Certainly a lot of the people who are on the old houses on Ward Hill Road, they, for lack of a better way to put it, have a legitimate gripe because when when those houses were built, it was all farmland. But like a lot of the houses across the street, they're what, 20 years old? It doesn't mean that you aren't seeing issues. It doesn't mean that you don't want to see additional development across the street. I get it. I understand that. I live on a rural street myself. I don't want to see a whole lot of other development there. But one of my neighbors down the road asked me, she said, well, what if she'd been approached by someone to put in a bunch of houses on there? What do I think of that? I said, personally, I would hate it. But as a town officer, I can't stop you from developing your land as long as you're doing it within the bounds of the zoning codes. And that's what they're there for. And so again, the previous 2 times that this developer came forward with this proposal, he was trying to go around the zoning laws. And by going around, I mean, he wanted to be rezoned or have a designation removed. And that we said no. But if he builds within the confines of the zoning laws, and the town, and specifically the planning board, addresses all the issues from a seeker standpoint, he does have a constitutional right to develop his land, whether you like it or not, unfortunately, and I just mean unfortunately for you. Now, with that said, when we took a look at this, so one of the issues, we hear a lot, and I'm going to go down this list, right? We hear traffic. Okay, so the traffic, we're not actually the municipal authority with regards to traffic on that road. It's a county road. It's the county who makes the decision. They looked at it and said, this is absolutely not a problem for that road. But because of the seeker and all the concerns from all the neighbors, the town basically commissioned a traffic study, and we asked the developer to pick up the cost. So we didn't ask the developer to do the traffic study because I always, as someone who in business used to hire consultants, sometimes, they're never going to violate their fiducial, or not even fiducial, they're not going to, their professional stuff. But one of the things, when you look at certain pieces of data, you can look at it one of 2 ways, right? So I said, let's have the town do it. So our direction is just give us the honest truth here, right? I don't want any bias. We're not saying whether we want it to pass or fail, nothing. Just give us what you think the traffic pattern is going to be. And it was unequivocal. There is no issue. Even when we looked at the Monroe County data standpoint from a traffic accident, there is no traffic hotspots on Ward Hill Road. There is less than average number of accidents in that area than for county roads. So I know it doesn't feel like it, and especially again for the houses that have been on Ward Hill for a long time, I get it. But the data doesn't support it, and the county just has made it crystal clear it's not an issue. Again, if we go to do the town park, we'll be doing a similar stuff, and we'd be in front of the county. It would be ultimately the county's decision as to whether, if they think that a pavilion or a cabin would cause, especially a cabin, would cause too much traffic for that intersection. That would be up to them, not up to us. But like I said, in terms of the traffic study, when it looked at this, it really didn't see a difference. And I know people say that the tube counts are old, they're 2 or 3 years old, except that in those 2 or 3 years, there's been 3 additional houses built in that neighborhood, and that's it. And then even then we asked them, again, this gets back into what stuff do I pick? There's almost always a range for what I use for the various stuff. How much growth am I seeing in the region? Let's use the maximum amount of that range. And even when they used that in the traffic study, it still didn't cause an issue. Interestingly enough, the traffic on Pinnacle and East Henrietta are actually down from what they were, and this is based off tube counts, from where they were 6-7 years ago. Now, we think some of that it had to do with there was additional traffic on East Henrietta Road because of a bridge closure down in Rush over 390 that they were redirecting some of that traffic up East Henrietta Road. So if you actually look, there was a spike in East Henrietta traffic grew and then kind of dropped off again. But there's absolutely zero evidence from a traffic standpoint that this will cause an issue. Could they be wrong? Well, of course they can be wrong. But, you know, again, from all the stuff that they looked at, it's not an issue. So the second thing we looked at was drainage. And again, based off of feedback from all the residents, we asked the developer and the engineer to come up with a system that would take the water away from Ward Hill. So it would reduce the amount of water running down Ward Hill and into people's yards. Because, you know, I know my deputy town supervisor, Craig Eckert, went out there. I know Mike Catalano and Tim Lessing. So Tim Lessing does highway drainage and Mike Catalano does more or less the area drainage. They both went down there and looked and they said, yeah, there are some drainage issues here. And so we went to the developer and said, look, can you put this in to drain the water back and put in a big enough pond to detain the water that comes off so that we reduce the amount of water that runs into adjacent properties. And they did. And so when you look at the numbers, you know, again, are they going to be 100% correct? No, I'm sure they're not. They'll be better than Weatherman, but that's not hard hurdle to clear. You know, like I said, that we'll have them work on that system. And one of the things that we will do is if they're, you know, if there needs to be adjustments made, because as we see this stuff, as we're working on this, that's one of the first things that goes in before you have all the house and structure in place. You know, if we need to make adjustments, we can make adjustments. The other thing too is because it then becomes a town owned system, the town drainage folks can actually work on it. You know, one of the things you run into, if this property were causing a bunch of issues for the other houses because it's only on a single property, we can't go on there and take care of it. Once it's a dedicated system, we can actually work on that and work on the potential downhill drainage. So if sometime down the road, you know, we're seeing more rain or the soil conditions change and create more runoff or whatever, there are things that we can look to do to help correct that down the road. So again, from a drainage standpoint, I actually see it being better, not worse. And I will point out, these are my opinions and I'm not one of the decision makers. I'm just letting you understand where I'm coming from when I look at this. And, you know, I don't have the emotional investment that most of you sitting out there in the audience do. I'm looking at this certainly more dispassionately. It's not necessarily right or wrong. I'm just explaining to you where I'm seeing this and you know, essentially how I see it, so you get an understanding of where we're coming from. Because, you know, there seems to be a belief that we're not listening. We are listening, and almost all the things we've asked them to do is because of feedback from you guys, from the residents, because you certainly know your neighborhood better than we do, right? And so we've learned about these issues and we've gone out there and we've studied them and we've walked with some of you guys and looked at these things and said, okay, let's see what we can do to solve that. So one of the next things then was character of neighborhood. Now this one gets, unlike drainage and traffic and other stuff where I have hard metrics, this one's kind of fuzzy, right? What does character of neighborhood mean? You know, and would having duplexes there have changed the character of neighborhoods? You could make the argument that there's duplexes and even I think, I don't know what you call them, quadplexes to the west of there. But they're kind of hidden, more tucked away. They're not as visible. And when you look to the north, you know, you have some higher end homes, right? They had a particular, if I remember correctly, a particular minimum square footage. There was a standard by which those homes had to meet. And so I got it when the people from that neighborhood raised the complaint that, you know what, these duplexes are very different than what the rest of the neighborhood is. And it's potentially going to have a negative impact on the character of the neighborhood. So again, we went and brought that concern to the developer. And the developer did switch from the duplex homes to the single homes. And so, you know, are they a bit smaller in size. They're not, they're certainly not cheap houses, right? And part of the reason they're not cheap houses is because of all the burdens we're putting on this developer, right? He's taken a lot of burdens. He's putting in the sidewalks, he's putting in the parklands, he's putting in the sewer. He's, had to do all these studies. So, I get it. He's feeling the pressure. He's obviously emotionally invested in this as well. We've got him yelling at us too because we're putting all these burdens on him. But what we're trying to do here with us and the planning board and all the boards for that matter is protect the town while allowing the developer to exercise their constitutionally protected right to develop their lands within the confines of the zoning laws. And so when I look at when he made that change and went to the individual homes, and that the spacing is essentially the same spacing as what you see in the Branch Brook and Long Branch area. They're not crammed close together like some homes that I hate on Oak Mills Crossing, for instance, I think are way too close together. I don't see how this becomes a negative impact from a character of neighborhood standpoint. So then the last thing is green space. So, there's a debate, and this is where the New York State Clustering 278 law came from. If you were to go to all 5-acre lots, you would need to have a lot more roads and a lot more sewers and a lot more water. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. The reason the developers want to do it isn't because they think it's going to look better. It's because the shorter the infrastructure, the lower the costs, right? It's clustering from a developer standpoint is purely from a cost driver standpoint. If you had to build all the infrastructure to put all these homes out on an individual 5-acre lots, all with sewer and water, it would be astronomically expensive. But part of that law, and the reason the law came into place, is because when you look at it from an open space standpoint, when I put in a bunch of 5-acre lots, everybody's got on those lots a house and maybe a barn or a garage or a shed and outbuilding, a pool. And I actually end up with less open space than if I cluster. And so that law was put into place because it serves two needs. It serves the needs of the developers to be cost effective. And oh, by the way, the town as well, because the town now has to maintain less roads. The town has to maintain less sewer, less drainage. The county has to maintain less water. The utility companies have to maintain less power. So it helps all the stuff be from a maintenance standpoint as well as an installation standpoint. And it preserves over 80 acres of open space, of which roughly 50 acres is farmland. It's more like 85, if I remember correctly. So it preserves a whole lot of green space. So from a standpoint of our farmland protection and from the comprehensive land use plan with the goal of preserving open space in the south portion of town, it does meet that. Would it be better if he was building this up in an R115 area and pulling land? Sure, but we don't have that law in place, first off. Second of all, he doesn't own that property. And third, I'll be honest, I don't know how much more you can cram into R115. You don't want to get a whole lot smaller than 15,000 square foot lots. People are essentially on top of each other at that point. So, whereas we're looking at some transfer of development rights and we're working on that right now. In fact, we had a meeting at, 11 o'clock this morning. We are not necessarily looking at doing it for, the only place that we're going to pull development rights is in this area. We're not going to allow you to pull development rights from anywhere else. The only pull I can do is from the rural residential. We've talked about that the receiving parcel can be in other areas. One of the things that we're trying to do from the development of the transfer of development rights is that the receiving parcel not be in the prime farm area. But again, this particular one is not being done through transfer of development rights. This is being done through New York State clustering. It's a different portion of law. In New York State clustering, it has to be adjacent parcels. So yes, I'm losing 20 acres of farmland. Another 30 acres is going from farmland to open parkland. So I will note that we've got stuff down the road, and I absolutely want to hear from residents as to what they want to see as far as that parkland. Some people want to see open, open fields, fallow fields. Some people want to see it mowed. That's a decision that comes down the road. And again, that's one that we will absolutely take input from all the people who live in that area as to, and it could be a combination thereof, right? But the point being, there will be a bunch of acreage, assuming we take this public space, that will be preserved as parkland. There'll be a much significant larger area that's being preserved as farmland. So when I go right down the list, it meets all the stuff. And so what it really comes down to is that there are a bunch of people who've had bad experiences, prior experiences with the developer. There's also people who have had good experiences. You typically won't see them here because when you have good experiences, you typically don't go to show up. You show up when something pisses you off, right? It's not to say we haven't gotten letters. We did. We've gotten a letter from someone who said they had a better experience with this developer than one of the other developers in town. It doesn't mean he's a saint. I'll be perfectly blunt, and I've told Ron this to himself. He has a mannerism that he's initially confrontational, and it just turns people off immediately, and that he needs to work on that. He's butted heads with me. He's butted heads with Craig. He's butted heads with a bunch of us. But again, he's far from the only developer. In fact, I can only think of one set of developers that I've worked with so far that I haven't butted heads with yet. And that's out of probably 2 to 3 dozen. So, when you look at it, there is a natural contention that's created because the developer wants to build stuff. The town is trying to preserve open space and the developer's trying to be cost effective. The town's saying, no, well, you've got to do it to this standard. You've got to add this. We want a sidewalk. We realize it's a sidewalk to nowhere on Ward Hill, but the more of these we put in every time something comes in, then we can come along and just fill in the gaps and have a sidewalk. So people aren't walking on the shoulder of the road on a dangerous road like Ward Hill, like where I live on Brooks Road. When you have these old rural roads that climb up and down hills and they have minimal to no shoulders, that creates a dangerous situation. If I had the budget, I'd fix them all. I don't have that budget. So we have to look at how we can do that. And one of the things that we've made a commitment to, as in this board since January 1, 2018, is that we have made a commitment to getting sidewalks, especially on the main roads and on the collector roads. I look at on Martin Road, boy, I wish all those developments that went in near East Henrietta Road had all been forced to put in sidewalks along there, because now we'd only have to do a little bit of connection and we could have a path all the way down to Martin Road Park. If we want to do that today, the town's going to have to pay for the sidewalk the whole way, and that ain't cheap. So, we look at requiring the developers to do that stuff, and it creates contention because, again, that costs them money. That's out of their profit. And their only way to recoup that is to set their sale prices higher, which then restricts who they sell to. So, I get it. That confrontation's there. And the existing land home, nobody wants to see stuff developed next to them. When I bought my house on the corner of Bailey and John Street, I was surrounded by cornfields, right? 2 years later, I had an office park in my backyard. I didn't like it. I didn't have any say in the matter, right? If the only real say you have, being blunt, and I know people don't like to hear it, is to buy the land and keep it wild yourself. And to be honest, we had some people who did that. Naomi Pless did that on Beckwith. They didn't want to see a developer come in and build a housing tract in the one area, so they went and they acquired the land themselves, and they have declared it forever wild. Obviously, most people don't have that ability to do it. And so again, you end up with these natural contentions between the people who live there and the homeowners or the landowners who want to develop. And part of our job as board members is to create the zoning laws that best protect that. So one of the things, if you look at that comprehensive land use update, one of the things you'll see is an increase in the amount of buffering between the areas. And that's what some of those conservation areas around the perimeter represent. It's that they had to set this back from existing houses so that a new development didn't just plop right directly in your backyard, like where I've seen with some of them. That business on John Street, there was one where the parking lot for the former FedEx building came right up to the people's fence lines in their backyards. It was horrible, and it never should have been allowed to happen. And unfortunately, it did under previous administration. I couldn't even tell you which one. I'm not trying to throw a particular administration under the bus. I'm just saying it shouldn't have happened. And that's one of the things that we looked at on this town board of protecting. But again, you can't shut down all development, or else they will sue and they will win, because it is a constitutionally protected right. So I'll get off my pedestal. Yep.
Got a few questions online.
Okay.
Throw out there for you.
Well, and we've got people here too. Yep. Sure.
So Peter Vars with BME. I just wanted to clarify a couple things as it relates to, I guess, this next phase of the discussion about character of the neighborhood, the application, drainage, traffic. Just a few things I wanted to point out. First of all, I do want to point out that you should have received a package from us dated June 25th that had the open space maps to it. Why I'm pointing that out? That package explained how this project met the clustering requirements under Section 2, Town Law 278, how it met the open space incentive law requirements of your local town code, and also how it addressed the rural design guidelines. All of those are under the purview of the planning board, and those are being reviewed with them also. But my point is that information has been put forth. One of the key things to point out about this plan is for instance, under the open space incentive plan, that requires an open space of 65%. This plan proposes 82% and proposes an additional 20 acres above and beyond what is required by the code. And that's really what this project has done. It has taken all of this input. I mean, as the supervisor said, we've been going at this for almost 2 years now of trying to come up with a plan. This plan accomplishes so many goals. Obviously, the developer is able to develop the property as of right. The density proposed at 47 acres is the allowed density under the rural residential code. Okay? There is not an increase in units being here because he's gone to a smaller lot size. That's the calculation we're required to provide. Again, all being reviewed by the planning board. But the density is established by Town Law 278, by the code. The developer, yes, as he said, yes, there is a benefit to him from the reduction in infrastructure, but also the real true benefit to him is he's able to bring a product online that he believes he can market and sell versus a subdivision of 5-acre lots. With regards to the open space component, and that we've kind of hit on this a few times, but it goes without saying, it needs to be reiterated. This plan achieves a key goal of the town's agricultural farmland protection plan. The Larkin parcel was an identified priority piece. The developer has gone out and acquired the rights to that to basically have them join in this application. That land can no longer be further subdivided. There will be a condition placed if the planning board grants the preliminary subdivision approval that will get recorded with the deed with the property and on the map that will say no further subdivision of this property will be allowed, because again, the density was established by the code, and that density is now all being placed within the cul-de-sac street. So that is the protection to the town. but also more importantly, it's allowing you to meet a goal of your ag protection plan, which is to taking those lands, allow them to be sustainable for farming. And I would argue thus maintaining the character of the neighborhood. In addition, the 20+ acres of town parkland. Yes, there could have been a lot of different things done with that land that are all allowed under Town Law 278 and even the Open Space Incentive Law. But instead, what we're proposing to do, and really is the action that we're looking for the town board to take, is we're offering it in dedication because we do see a synergy. This land can complete an important link between not only this development, Ward Hill Road, but the developments up further to the north. There will be a sidewalk constructed along the subdivision street. We've talked a lot about the roadway off the subdivision street that would go into this proposed town parkland. But the point is, we're going to allow through this development to allow all those residents north of Ward Hill Road, they will have a designated pedestrian way to get to the Lehigh Valley Trail, to get down into those existing town parklands that are really off of Trailview South in a no man's land right now. We're going to complete that link. That's 28 acres of land that is being conveyed to the town. That then falls into the drainage issue. We've talked a little bit about the drainage. What happens if something goes right? So actually one of the benefits of the facility being located on the town property, it allows the town to be able to go in and modify that pond at any time if they need to. If something is occurring downstream, if something is occurring upstream, the town now has control of that facility. They have control of all the land around it, so they can modify that facility if necessary 5, 10, 15 years from now. So that's a benefit too. With regards to the traffic, the one point I would just like to make is, yes, Monroe County DOT is the regulatory authority on this. They have reviewed the study. We've prepared, they've reviewed the study. The town has commissioned. They are finding no issue out here. In their emails, conversation to town staff, their words are no issues whatsoever. That verbatim is what they state. And that is based on their knowledge of their highway system, of the traffic system, of the development in the area. As has been mentioned, while a lot of this may be based on 2-count data taken a few years ago, the fact of the matter is the land use pattern in the immediate area has not changed. There has been no dynamic change that has caused the county to raise the issue that a traffic pattern has changed from when they last did their counts. There's been nothing significant at the Ward Hill Road and East Henrietta Road intersection, nothing of significance at Ward Hill Road and Pinnacle Road. But what is occurring as a result of this development is something the supervisor just touched base on, which is a traffic issue. We've heard a lot about safety of people using that road for biking and walking. The requirement, if the planning board grants subdivision approval, will be sidewalks would be constructed along the Ward Hill Road frontage of the developer's property. That is the beginning of how sidewalks are constructed along the arterials and things like that. So there is being something done to start addressing that issue. So there is a lot here that we summarized in our materials to you that I just wanted to cover very briefly as to how this project is really meeting a lot of goals of the town of Henrietta, but also is complying with the code and the zoning laws governing the development of this property. Thank you.
Peter, just a quick question. You mentioned, he's making a product he's able to sell. How long does the developer think this will take to be fully developed?
Right now, the numbers where they are, probably 6 years.
So it's 6-year build out is what he's predicting.
Thank you.
So those online questions, if you want me to throw them out there?
Sure. I had a question for the attorney.
Okay.
You know, when they have the line of credit out there, do we hold a
Letter of credit?
Letter of credit, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, excuse me, letter of credit. Do we hold on to that money until it's fully developed? Because if he puts in infrastructure, let's say the sewer, and he only has the development half developed at the time, we don't know if the sewers work or not fully.
That's
So
certainly
do
what
we hold, do
that's
we?
what I would advise.
do we
So,
hold-
so typically what happens, Mike, is, again, the town has from the lateral connection back. So if he puts in all the lateral connections, it's typically done by phase. So let's say he does it in 2 phases, we would typically release the way it's, this is my observation, and Craig might be able to answer better if I misfire here, but typically what happens is we'll do a partial release upon completion of, phase 1. And then we will do a subsequent completion upon phase 2. If there's 1 or 2 parcels left, they will go in, Mike's team can go in and basically examine, they can run a camera down it, make sure everything is fully compliant, so that from that lateral clean out all the way down through the mains is all correct. So a lot of times if there's, what is it, 85% for like roads? 75%. So like, we don't allow them to put the blacktop on the roads until a certain percentage of the top course of houses are in there, because otherwise the construction vehicles potentially tear it up. So, it's not necessarily 100% completed, but again, if they haven't put in the infrastructure up to that clean out, then yes, we would continue to hold it because it hasn't been built. But like I said, what a lot of times will happen is if there's 1 or 2 empty lots, the connection will be there. It'll be essentially capped just past the clean out. We'll scan it, check it, make sure it's all good. And then basically when it comes time to sometime down the road, they build it, they'll cut that cap and they'll extend it from there. But the part that is dedicated to the town has all been fully scanned and checked. And, that's what both Mike Catalano's team in drainage and sewer takes care of, as well as Chris Martin's team in engineering. They'll review all that stuff. They'll make sure that, the stuff is at the proper pitch and that the connections were done properly. And believe me, they get on them if they're not. If they find construction debris, which is a common thing, right? What happens is some of the contractors are lazy, and so they'll flush the concrete down the drain in the basement and it gets into the drainage. We'll make them go in and clean that stuff out. If they didn't do the cut in properly where they join the main into a manhole, we'll make them come in and dig it up and put it in correctly. So, that does all get checked, and those funds are not released until it passes that inspection.
Well, on this letter of credit, I'd like to make sure that if this is approved, that there is enough to replace or fix any issues we have, and it's not returned until it's done right, and made sure that, we don't return it. If there's a drainage issue, we may not know for a year or a few months. So
There's often a separate maintenance bond that's put against infrastructure. Typically, they go for 2 years.
Okay.
Sandy Wheeler asks, based on what you are saying, has this been approved? Has this received any even preliminary approval at planning board yet, or?
No.
No, okay. So
approval is tomorrow. The planning board is tomorrow, but they've already had their public hearing. So tomorrow is their secret determination, followed by preliminary subdivision approval.
All right. Karen Wolg asked, what recourse do we have as homeowners if the drainage problems are not solved or improved by this pond? I think we discussed that at length a half an hour ago.
So I will just say that if after we put this stuff in, and there are still anytime there's downstream issues, let us know. We'll come take a look at it. Again, if it's a systemic issue, the town fixes it. If it's just specific to your property, so if your downspouts weren't channeled away from your foundation, or there wasn't enough gravel put around your foundation, we can't fix that. That's up to you. But if it's an issue that drainage is running where it shouldn't and dumping a ton of water into your yard, we will do our best to fix that. And I say do our best because sometimes we don't have the easements in there necessary to do the work. And if the homeowner upstream from you won't let us on their property to fix it, we can't fix it.
Sometimes it's a private problem, not a public problem.
Yes.
Sandy Wheeler also asks, based on the last call, the traffic study was done more than 2 years ago. Please clarify.
So again, the traffic study was done this year. The tube counts were done 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
They were due to be done this summer. We said it was silly to do tube counts this summer when we knew all the traffic patterns were down from COVID, right? If I had done tube counts for Chick-fil-A this summer, they would have said, oh, you don't even need a light, right? Because they'd have gotten green grade, high grade on the intersection because the traffic was so diminished. So it made no sense to do tube counts. So instead, what we did is we looked at the development that occurred in the area and said, okay, there was, again, it was only 3 additional houses. So from the immediate area, there wasn't a whole lot of traffic, but let's add 3 cars, right? 3 cars in, 3 cars out. Okay. So then they looked at what is happening in the other areas, right? There's a new development down the street. There's another development over here. They have those counts. They know that. So it's called background. There's a natural growth in the background traffic. So they applied that. And as I said, there's a range that you can apply. And we asked them, when you're doing that stuff, look at all the maximums. Let's look at the worst possible scenario here. And even under the worst possible scenario, there was not an issue. So the traffic study is new. The tube counts are the only thing that are old. But again, all the tube counts on the other roads in the area, so main roads get tube counted at a more frequent rate than do collector roads like Ward Hill, and certainly, I don't even know if they even bother putting them on the side streets. So the point being that whereas the tube counts for Ward Hill might be out of date, we had recent tube counts for other roads, main roads in the area, and the background traffic had only increased a small amount, but that amount was applied to the amount of traffic on Ward Hill from the old tube count. So they basically said, okay, the old tube count said this, let's raise it, I don't remember what it was, 5-10% based on background traffic. So they looked at all that stuff. They looked at where is the stuff, the folks likely to turn based on existing traffic patterns, how much are they gonna increase in that? How much is it gonna create from a turning lane issue? Do they need to put in a separate right turn, left turn at the intersections? They looked at all of that stuff, and the answer was no. There really is no issues. And again, the county has been doing this for years. Any others?
Yep. This anonymous attendee has 3. Who is paying for connection from Trailview to Forest View Subdivision?
There's no connection there other than if we do the hiking trails.
Okay.
So if we do the hiking trails, that would be the town because it would be part of the park. That would come out of either the park budget, or we would go after a SAM grant, something like that, to state aid to municipalities to go after that. Which actually reminds me, one thing I just want to make a clarification. You heard Peter mention Town Law 278. That's actually a state law. It's one of the worst naming things.
It's New York State town law.
It's New York State's laws that govern the towns. So it's called town law, but I hate the way it's referred to because it causes confusion. When we talk about our laws, we talk about town code, just to try to keep it separate. I just forgot to mention that. Go ahead.
The second question, it's kind of rhetorical. It says, what good do the sidewalks do on the frontage for all of the people that walk the entire length of Ward Hill Road?
So the answer to that is it lowers the cost for the town when we eventually get to installing sidewalks further down Ward Hill Road. So again, going back to the Martin Road example, if all the developments along Martin Road, we'd have had a sidewalk all the way from West Henrietta Road to the expressway overpass, and I would have then just been able to put one on the town property. We wouldn't have had to acquire any property rights or any easements. We could have put it right on the town parkland and had a sidewalk going all the way from all those houses, collecting them and getting them to the park without kids ever having to walk on shoulders, ride their bikes in the street. So that's what it helps. There's no question it starts out as a sidewalk to nowhere. But as we then start to expand and extend that sidewalk, it becomes more useful. Basically what it's doing is it's putting that cost on the developer's shoulders instead of on the taxpayer's shoulders, plain and simple.
Okay, third is more of a comment from this person. For people in our neighborhood that want access to Lehigh Valley Trail, we can access off of East Henrietta Road. No need for us to walk through a cluster development to get to it.
Except to my knowledge, that section of East Henry Road does not have a sidewalk. So for kids, you know, for people who want to walk there, I'm assuming they're talking about the old Dr. I forget his name, Dr. Burns property and the access. There's an access right there across from Trailview. Yeah, Woodridge Trail, there's also an access. So, you know, there are other accesses, no question. But the other thing, again, this is going to be a town park. We'll have a playground. So the people in that, you know, with kids in that area could walk or ride their bikes or drive to the town park right in their neighborhood and have a playground, a town park playground to play on. And that sidewalk will be fully connected with the areas across, you know, the Long Branch Brook area across the street.
Okay, Colin Cornair says, to be clear, construction and development will happen for up to 6 years after approval.
So my understanding, and Ron, correct me, your plan is to do the infrastructure in the first year or two, and then potentially, you know, as lots, basically develop a group of lots. When those sell out, then you'll develop the next ones. But so it's the individual houses that are going to continue for a long time, not necessarily the infrastructure. The primary grading, the drainage, all that stuff is going to go in immediately. Again, the one exception from a road standpoint is until you hit that 75% homes in, the top coat won't be on there. But the base coat is very drivable. You just don't want it super long because it's more porous and it's potential to break up from freezing. But there, you know, that again, that's how we do it for all the developments in town. And so that's nothing different.
All right, Rachel has a few comments. She says, I will not allow my girls to walk or ride their bikes on Ward Hill because there is always fast traffic. And she also says, I live on Church Hill Road and I am very worried about the probable traffic increase that will show up on my street as well as Hill Terrace, adding well over 100 plus vehicles every day. They aren't going to wait at Ward and East Henrietta. I can see the traffic backing up and cutting through our two streets. We have a beautiful quiet street now, and sometimes people cut through now. We have many more young ones growing up here now and concerned about extra noise and traffic. I don't believe there will not be any issues with this.
Okay, I mean, other than when you look at cutting through there, I don't know that it saves a whole lot. I don't live in that area. I couldn't tell you how many people do or don't cut through. So I really can't answer that question.
That's all the ones I have now on here, unless anyone else has them.
People out here, I know there was one gentleman who had asked, he'd spoken about the park and wanted to chime in later. Do you still want to? Yeah. Yep, coming up. Wait, we have to change the shower cap.
Thank you very much. All right, hopefully I'll do better with the microphone than I did on the first time around. Again, Benjamin Skomsky. I live at 16 Long Branch, which is directly north of the proposed subdivision. I wanted to follow up with a few questions of different things that were brought up. And since we were just talking about the 6-year build out, we're just trying to gauge how realistic of an estimate is that, and sort of as a proxy for that, how many units were in the Long Trail development and how long did it take for that specific development to get to completion? If anybody knows the answer.
36 units in there, and it's taken about 3 years right now.
36 units, 3 years, according to Ron Henkel.
And
Did
was
you say
that
Long Branch or Long Trail?
Long Branch? I'm sorry.
Yes, Long Branch, not Long Trail.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking where I live.
No, you're asking him for his Long Trail or Long
Correct.
Branch?
For Long Trail was what I was interested in. So 36 and 3, okay. And was that done in stages like they're talking about for this one?
This would be 1 day here also. So same way we did Long Trail.
Right, so, okay. And then just a comment, and I wasn't aware of this, maybe somebody else can talk with more authority about the way the layout relates, the law to the fire road. Was I correct in hearing you say that the fire road is an alternative to the developer putting sprinklers in at the end of the development?
I'm not an expert on that particular portion of code, but that's my understanding is that basically, again, it was new, Craig, what was it, this year? 2 years ago? That basically they said if you have beyond a particular number of units, you have to have a second exit if it's not sprinkler.
Right.
So it's purely has to do with fire response, emergency response, so one of the things going back to it, I know someone had mentioned the comment about the landing strip. I'm assuming that's what they're referring to. The developer would love to not put that in. But the code calls for it unless the state says that, no, you don't have to do it.
It seems to me this is a simple solution that the developer can bear the cost then by putting sprinklers in and avoid giving the town the perpetual burden of plowing and maintaining this road. It seems to me that if we do it the way it's planned, this is just another thing we're giving to them.
Well, we're not giving them. He's building it according to New York State building code, and we can't say, sorry, you can't build it according to New York State building code.
Well, what I'm saying is if we have this alternative to avoid this downstream cost, why not have the developer do it at the outset, right? Doesn't that make more sense for the town?
That is up to the developer. That's what I'm saying. New York State building code says I can do it this way.
But given that the road would ultimately be dedicated to the town, wouldn't we have a little bit of play there in that?
No.
It's not. What would the status of that roadway be then?
I'm saying, no, we don't have leeway. That road, again, is an emergency road only. And it will have a crash gate. And so it's only used if an emergency vehicle needs it.
Sure.
So the only maintenance we have to do is to plow it. And again, that's the burden that the state essentially put on us by passing that law. So it's hardly the first unfunded mandate coming out of the New York State.
Sure. But my question is, who owns the road?
To my knowledge, the town would own that road.
So that
Is that correct, Craig? Do you know? Once it's dedicated.
Right.
So Craig says once it's dedicated, essentially once it's been built to the standards of the state and the town, it then gets dedicated to the town.
So what you're saying, it's up to the developer to do either or, have the road or have sprinklers.
Correct. As long as they have to build, right.
It's up to the developer. It's not up to us.
Right.
But
certainly as it relates, and we're talking about this in the context of the open space, the town isn't necessarily in a position where if I come up to the town and say, here, take this unfunded mandate that will be with you forever, you can say no, presumably.
For the parkland?
No, for the roadway.
I don't know that we can say no to taking a dedication of a public road. Do you know, Don?
It depends on the road. I mean, there are certain, you need to have access to in and out and things like that. I'm not exactly sure under what, here's what I would say, you know, Branch Brook Drive, Long Branch Drive, all those roads are I assume were built and publicly dedicated.
Correct. Pretty much every road in town.
And are plowed by the town and they have to maintain it. And the same thing here. If the town starts treating different developers differently,
we're going to get sued.
It gets itself into a different kind of problem. So, you know, if the town had a reason that was distinct from all these other developments surrounding it that are now public roads, I think it would be worthwhile to look into it, but I'm not aware of any distinction.
So I'll give you an example of one place where there is a private road instead of a public road, Samantha's Way. The developer made that decision because if it was a public road, they have to meet setback requirements, which aren't present on a private road. So the property owners came to us and said, could you take dedication of the road? And we said, no, we can't unless you remove half the houses. Because again, they don't meet the setback requirements. So, but again, that was a decision of the developer, not the town, to build it that way. That's the way the New York State laws work.
Sure.
If they meet their building codes, and to Don's point, we cannot be arbitrary and capricious in our decision-making. So if every other development, when they build the roads to our standards, and we take dedication of them, we can't then single this one out and say, sorry, we're not going to take that road. You have to put in sprinklers.
Well, I think that it isn't necessarily arbitrary or capricious because this seems to be an instance of first impression since this fire code is a rather new thing, right? We have to do is put in a town code prior to them putting in the application. We can't do it in response to him doing this. Right. I think we're talking past each other a little bit here, but my point is that because the fire code has changed to the point where it allows this, it's the state fire code as I understand it, that it wouldn't necessarily be arbitrary. We have a good faith basis for saying, here's what's different about this case than all these other cases. There's this new law, and then this is otherwise an expense that's going to fall to the town in perpetuity as it relates to the maintenance.
This isn't the first development that has multiple accesses.
Well, this is the first. I thought we just.
It's not the first. There's others.
Which, with respect to the fire road?
Uh-huh.
Where? I'm genuinely asking. I'm not.
So, for instance, Rivers Run has a crash gate onto Westminster. Forgot where the other ones are. There's a number of them. There's a bunch of these crash gates around town. Right south of Town Park, there is I don't know my road names well enough, but there, if you go into those back areas, you'll come to the end of one of the streets. There's a crash gate there. Thank you. Green Clover. So there are other ones around. They're doing it. They had to do the same thing over in what's it called, Parkview at Town Center, or whatever it's called. They required one for there as well. So there are others that are doing this. Again, what typically has to happen, you can't change your rules in response to something. If we think that this is something that is worthwhile for the town going forward, then we would need to put forth a town law and pass it. Now, one of the questions is whether we would have to do research as to whether that town law would stand up. So there's a bunch of, town codes that people put in place that they get challenged in court and they get thrown out. So, but my point is, again, we've taken dedication of that in other places. I can't just throw that burden on him here. Well, if he wants to do that himself, he can, but I don't see how we put that burden on him when we haven't required others to do it under the exact same situation.
Well, I guess my question is, and I wasn't familiar with those other instances, is if they happened before this state fire code changed, then you're not comparing apples to apples, you're comparing apples to oranges. You've got a different set of circumstances as it relates to the fire code.
The number of units changed. So it used to be a much bigger neighborhood,
Sure.
required a second entrance. So they shrunk the number of units down.
Right, nonetheless, though, that's a change.
But some of them have happened since then.
Okay, and again, I'm asking the question because I
Right.
don't know the answer.
Sure.
And then we talked a little bit about the difference between the inaptly named town law versus the town code. And it seems to me that there's a little bit of conflict between the state town law and the state town code as it relates to, or I'm sorry, the Henrietta town code. It's got me all tripped up. In the state town law, it's 278 sub 3B. It says a cluster development shall result in a permitted number of buildings or lots or dwelling units, which in no case shall exceed the number which could be permitted if the land were subdivided into lots conforming to the minimum lot size and density requirements of the zoning ordinance. So if we're looking at this project in particular, let's just use the rough number of 100 acres, which is pretty darn close to what we have here. This is in rural residential 2, correct?
There is no rural residential 1 or 2. It's just,
RR2
there is none, that doesn't exist anymore. It's just rural residential.
Okay.
But even in the days of rural residential 2, long ago, some previous town board, I don't know, long ago, some previous town board put in something called the open space incentive, which talked about
Right.
the density allowed in the rural residential, okay? So you either had a 5-acre lot minimum in the one, 3-acre in the other, or it was 0.45 parcels per acre. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but it's in there as far as right in the town code. It talks about how much it's talking about, and it specifically addresses if I'm doing a cluster development, and then it offers a few additional units based on if I meet certain requirements from an open space requirement.
Right.
But so it expands upon New York State Law 278 clustering and says if I use the clustering and I provide at least, what was it, Peter, 55? 65. Provide at least 65% open space, then I can get these requirements. So the town did that, and that was, I believe, in response to the 2011 comprehensive land use plan update. Well, you can quote me on it because it's going to be in the minutes, but I can't guarantee that's right.
Right.
But that's my recollection, is it was done after that comprehensive land use plan, and it was done specifically to try to preserve open space. And so that's what that incentive, open space incentive program, it's under section 295-15. I don't know if I got the right number.
51.2.
51.2. I had the right 2 digits. I just transposed them. So, that's in there and it's fully defined. And so again, if you don't like that code, then talk to the board and the board can take a look at repealing that code, but we can't repeal it for this case. It's in there. It's what's allowed.
Right. So, and then you started going exactly where my question is. And earlier you said, the state law is ultimately what the town code has to conform with. So
Correct.
how do we reconcile that the state law says that on this, and
Don can
I
answer
kind of
that.
expected this was.
Yeah,
gonna
I
be
think
wheelhouse.
you're starting to ask the supervisor legal questions. He's not an attorney.
Okay.
The town code provides the types of incentives that are permitted, and the town is following the town code. In fact, and also when it comes to the density requirements, the planning board's handling that aspect of the application, not the town board.
Right. I'm just curious if the state law takes supremacy over the local law in this particular instance, because it
I
seems.
understand. You're making a presumption that's nuanced and that's not accurate. It's a legal question, and
Well,
I think
it's a
that
question, and I don't know the answer to it, and I was.
Can I put it this way, Don? Correct me where I stray. Town laws cannot contradict the state laws.
Right.
In almost all the state laws, they allow for the town to restrict some portions or expand some portions. And so, when you read all the stuff, it'll say, except where provided by law, and they're referring to the local law, right? That, here, this is the thing in that regards.
It's very nuanced.
Right,
And when you want to get into
clear
supersession and constitutionality and all that stuff, you're not asking land use questions now. You know, you're not asking questions over which this board has any jurisdiction over.
Well, I thought we were just generally discussing, but okay, nonetheless. You know, I guess I'll get to my last comment, which is this is just an instance where the developer's getting a ton of benefit, that there's play in the law, there's discretion for the town board, specifically as it relates to the open space and the obligations that it will provide downstream for the town. And then obviously this is more of a planning board issue as to the, you know, the layout of the plat and the other issues there. So I'll follow up, I guess.
I just want to address that the developer is getting a ton of benefit. The way incentive programs work is they say, I'm going to give the developer a benefit in order to give the town a benefit. And under New York state law, it says right in there, these two benefits should be of approximately equal value. Now, I don't think they have an issue if the town has a greater value, but they're not supposed to give the developer one greater. And so when they put that law on, they look at that and they say, this is, so when they put that law in place for the incentive, open space incentive plan, they looked at it and said, you know what? 97% of the people said they want us to preserve open space. So this is an important thing to us. And so we're going to put this in to preserve that open space. And that's why they put it in there. So the town gets benefit from that. In addition, as part of that stuff under the clustering rules, again, for the town to build new parks is non-trivial, right? We typically have to acquire land in order to do that. It's hard to build park on land you don't own, okay? So, you know, yes, we're taking that off the tax roll, but no matter what we do from a town park standpoint, any place we put a town park is not going to be on the tax roll. So we have an option. Do I buy land, in which case I spend a ton of taxpayer dollars to acquire the land, and now it's off the tax roll? Or do I take this land, where not only is the land being donated to the town, essentially, but in exchange, the developer is also putting in infrastructure that will help the town when it becomes a town park. So again, there's a cost to the developer to put in that 180 plus section of road, sewer, and water, right? Well, it's not sewer. The sewer isn't coming the whole way. The sewer's starting at the top because chances are we're not going to connect the sewer. But there will be a connection there in case we do ever decide to do the force main. I just don't think it's practical, but we want to leave our options open, right? So anyway, there's a cost to him to doing that. And so, but there is a even bigger benefit to the town because again, we have no parks in this portion of town. As far as the person's earlier comment about them not being off of side streets, that's simply not true. Again, Breeze Park is off of, what is it? Do you remember the name of the street, Craig? Yeah, but I mean, you have to go down multiple side streets to get to it. There is no main road that takes you to Breeze Park.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, off of Wildbriar, there's a town park that.
Yeah, it's off of, across from Blue Avocado.
Right.
And I grew up in Wildbriar and didn't even know it was there, so.
So there's a bunch of these town parks that do exist in the neighborhoods, and they're often only known to the neighborhoods, and not even necessarily to all of the people in the neighborhood.
I had no idea it was there.
So, you know, so like I said, the idea that the town parks aren't off neighborhood streets, that's not true, they are. Now, again, obviously, when we do that, we want to take a look to make sure we're not creating a burden on those residents when we do this park. We will take a look at that. But, you know, if it's not a significant more amount of traffic than goes down a normal street like that, then that's not going to be a big burden, right? I wouldn't put in a facility. I would never put a rec center back there, right? But again, a pavilion, the amount of traffic a pavilion generates isn't great. The amount of traffic a small playground generates isn't great, right? We're not talking, this isn't Veterans Memorial Park. But like I said, there is a big benefit to the town to have donated land, donated infrastructure in order to essentially jumpstart that park. Because what we don't have in this town, right? This town runs very lean on a tax basis. Our town tax rate is $1.33 per $1,000 of assessed value. That's peanuts. So I had somebody say to me the other day, I pay the town $8,000 in taxes. No, you don't. You pay the town $320 in taxes. The other $7,700 you pay in taxes goes to the school, the county, the fire district, not to us. This town operates very lean. And so as a result of that, it is very difficult for us to build new parks. It's very difficult for us to add new infrastructure to existing parks. And so when we have this opportunity to, basically, just to be clear, when they came talking about this, I'm the one who brought up the park, not them. They weren't necessarily looking to dump the land. Now, again, don't get me wrong. A lot of developers try to foist off the land. But I'm the one who approached about the park because I had been looking in the southeast section of town, where could we possibly put a park? Right? We do have a little piece of town property next to the Legacy. Not the best location. So when this came along, I'm like, oh my God, that's a perfect location, especially because it makes the rest of the land that we already own, that's already off the tax rolls, it makes it useful, and it provides another nice area where I can drive up to and park and get on the trails with, again, walking or biking. There is one of those, and there's a couple of places where you can do that. You can do that at Veterans Memorial Park. You can do that at the former Dr. Burns property on East Henrietta Road. But, this would provide a nice area where I can do that. When you look at, again, you go next door, Mendon Ponds, what a phenomenal park. Of course, it's not funded by the town, it's funded by the county. We don't have any county parks. We have to do all of our own parks. So any way I can find to reduce that burden on taxpayers and get a nice new park in an area where we don't currently have parks, I'm going to jump at that. I won't lie. I was very excited with the opportunity to be able to do that park. But again, that doesn't play into whether this thing is approved or not. This thing is approved or not based on what the planning board has. And again, going down that list of, there's two things you have to follow when you do any development. You have to meet the zoning code requirements, which again, he now does. The previous two times he didn't. And you have to meet seeker requirements. And that's, again, as I went down all the seeker issues, they've mitigated all the issues that were there. There was arguably questionable when it started, but they've taken care of the drainage. There were no traffic issues. They've taken care of the character of neighborhood. They've certainly taken care of the green space. When you go right down the list, they knock them all off. So again, if there are no remaining unmitigated significant impacts, then I'll be shocked if the planning board doesn't return a determination, what's called a negative declaration, which basically says there are no remaining unmitigated significant impacts. I could be wrong. I'm not a seeker expert. But boy, when I look at it, I just don't see where it is. I don't know.
Yeah, and certainly you said that it's an exchange and a cost-benefit analysis. And I think what it's important for the board to hear is all the folks here, all the folks that have shown up to the meetings time and time again, our cost-benefit analysis comes out differently than yours. And I think it's very important that the board knows that. So
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to come up? Come on. Let Linda change the shower cap. Actually went through all of her open ones.
While you're waiting, online question. I live on Branch Brook Drive and am concerned about traffic going through my neighborhood. Currently, they drive very fast and are now adding more traffic is a great concern. That's by anonymous.
So I've heard that. Again, I'm not a traffic expert. Just as somebody, if I were driving out there, I don't see how I would cross the street, go take a longer route down a twisting residential street versus going left and turning right onto West or East Henrietta Road. But I'm not in any way a traffic expert. The analysis from the traffic study did not call for any real increased traffic on Branch Brook, Long Branch. There are definitely people who travel too quickly down that road, as with all residential roads. Almost all of them either live in that street or visit that street. I won't say all of them, but a large percentage of it. On my street, it often tends to be the college kids who live at RIT and in Conference Center at the end of the street. They're running late for class, they zip down my road. You know, it's something we're taking a look at as to what we can do to help with speeders in residential areas. We're taking a look at the idea of a town constable. And what I mean by that is we would hire essentially a Monroe County sheriff whose responsibilities would be to the town. So we would assign their duties. You know, one of the problems there, we don't have a town police force. Of course, the huge benefit to that is that $1.33 tax rate, right? When you look at all the towns that have police forces, they are typically $5, $6 per thousand, or 7 or 8, depending on the town. The disadvantage, of course, is that we rely on the Monroe County Sheriff. Now, we've got a good partnership with them. I've been working with the new sheriff, Baxter, as well as the new captain for B-Zone. I was working well with the old B-Zone captain, but you know, especially Captain Fay has been very progressive and working on stuff, but he only has so many resources. And so if we want to have resources dedicated to take care of town-specific problems, then we're going to take a look at, well, what if we hire, essentially, we would pay the county for the cost of that additional position. And then we can basically say, today I want you to go sit on Long Branch for 2-3 hours and ticket people who are speeding through. And tomorrow I want you over on Calkins Road down the hill where they have problems. And the day after that, I want you on Brooks Road where they're coming flying over the hill, and so on and so forth, right? But until such a time as we have that, we have to rely on the sheriff to patrol those streets. Go ahead.
Marty Miller again, 109 Ward Hill Road. Mr. Vars, could you please explain how this drainage works exactly for me?
How the what works?
The
Drainage, the retention pond.
Okay. Can you maybe try using the podium mic or?
Yeah,
let me do
that. Okay, can you hear me, Becky?
Yeah, I'm sorry you have to stand so close, but I can.
Okay, so the map here on the right, this is the existing drainage pattern for the development property. It is broken into 2 areas. The red area here, which is about 7.5 acres, is based on the existing topography of the property. Along this line here is a break in grade such that the area to the north and east sheet drains across the land today and enters the the Ward Hill Road roadside drainage system. As we said, there's about 7.5 acres that drain into the Ward Hill Road drainage system, finds its way down Ward Hill Road, crosses under a culvert under Ward Hill Road, and then drains north. The remainder, the majority of the property, is this area here, which I believe is around 42 acres. That follows existing topography and drains primarily to the south and west. This line in yellow here is the existing flow path of the drainage in this area for how that water from this contributing drainage area exits the site, eventually finding its way to the west through Woodbridge Trail and further west. So that's the existing drainage patterns. Our requirements under the town's design standards and the New York State DEC's design manual are a couple of things. A, we cannot allow the rates of discharge from our property to exceed the existing rates of runoff. That's codified. Second of all, it is strongly recommended, and it is good engineering practice, is to maintain the existing points of discharge. In other words, have water leaving the property at the same place it does today, because that way we're not altering drainage patterns as they head downstream. Town staff that's one of their primary things they look at is the water going to leave the property in the post-development condition in the same location that it is today. So when we do our drainage study, we look at our proposed development. We use a combination of grading and storm sewers to collect the runoff and convey it to where we would like it to go, governed by those two principles I've already stated. So what we do is we identify what we call the analysis points, where the water leaves the sites, here and here. We do our calculations to determine the rates of runoff under today's conditions. We run those calculations. We then prepare the design of the subdivision utilizing the storm sewers to convey it to the proposed stormwater management system. There's two ways to control or reduce the rate of runoff off a piece of property from its current condition. One is reduce the drainage area. If you have less area contributing to that discharge or analysis point, it's going to reduce the rate of runoff. Or the other mechanism is to utilize a stormwater management plan, a stormwater management facility that collects that water, detains it, and then allows it to discharge at a controlled rate. This project uses both of those principles. What we did up here in the northeast corner was we reduced the drainage area. We reduced it from 7.5 acres to just about 2.5 acres. So we reduced the size of that drainage area by 2/3. And as a result of this being less area, the rate of discharge at this analysis point is reduced by 55%. The other thing we did here, though, that is very important, and town staff made sure of this in their review, was the runoff that is discharged in this northeast corner does not contain runoff from any proposed impervious surfaces. We're making sure that the proposed homes in this area that back up here in this road, that runoff goes to our stormwater facility, which I'll get to in a moment, such that this area outlined in red is just going to be the rear yard lawn areas. And that's part of the way we achieve our reduction in the rate of runoff at this northeast corner, is the combination of reducing the contributing drainage area and not introducing hard surface area into that drainage area that doesn't exist today. So that's how we accomplish the reduction in the northeast corner. In the southwest corner, which is the bulk of the development site, or the bulk of the site, we take all of the proposed impervious area. The proposed street will have a storm sewer network.
Mr. Vars, can I interrupt? Can you define impervious surfaces for me?
Okay. I didn't know.
It was from above.
Is that you?
So impervious surface is the rooftops, the driveways, the roads, basically hard surface where the stormwater, the rainwater stays on the surface, not allowed to infiltrate into the ground into our lawn areas. That is what impervious surface is.
Lawns are pervious or permeable, whichever.
Right. By definition, in the New York State DEC Stormwater Design Manual, lawn area is considered pervious surface area.
I've seen an awful lot of lawns where there's about 2 inches of topsoil over subsoil, and subsoil is not very pervious.
So I will continue to explain how this drains. So all the impervious areas will be collected in the proposed storm sewer system. In addition, the lawn areas of this development will also be conveyed to that storm sewer system. Might be hard to see. That's what these little yellow lines are here. Those are storm sewers that go to rear yard inlets. So there'll be storm sewer drains in the backyards So they can collect the runoff from the rear yards of these lots, but also this land here. So all of the runoff within the development footprint is being collected. The goal is, and what the design is this storm sewer then conveys the runoff into the proposed stormwater management facility that is proposed in this location. We obviously located at the downstream portion of the development because that's where the water wants to naturally go. We don't want to disrupt that existing drainage pattern. This facility is designed per the standards established by the New York State DEC and adopted within your own local town design standards. Very intricate of what we have to do, the number of storms we have to analyze, the amount of rainfall we have to analyze. That's all based on empirical data that the DEC has adopted and requires us to use. This facility is sized based on being able to hold the calculated volume of runoff that would be created through storm events within this drainage area. We calculate that volume, size this facility so that it can hold that volume, and then we design an outlet structure that controls the rate of outfall such that the rate of outfall coming out of this facility and eventually leaving the property in this location is at a rate of discharge less than the current rate of discharge that leaves this point today. And per the analysis we have submitted, what we are projecting is that the discharge from this area will be about at a rate 44% less than the current rate of runoff. One thing, Mr. Stafford, I would like to mention is you asked a question a while ago about the fact, though, that while, you know, yes, the volume doesn't get reduced, but it runs longer. One of the reasons that also occurs that I was remiss to tell you earlier is about 15 years ago, 15 or so years ago, the New York State DEC started to pay particular attention to stormwater quality, the water quality of the runoff being discharged. Runoff can pick up pollutants, convey it downstream. So there was a whole new set of regulations implemented that we had to design to. One of the things the DEC, working with EPA, it was actually EPA regulations that established these parameters, was what they found was that actually you want to hold the water in these ponds as long as you can. They require a 24-hour minimum because the point is you want this runoff that's coming from the development footprint into that pond, but you want that water to sit there a while. It uses the plant material that are specified to filter out the pollutants that were picked up by the stormwater. So it allows the pollutants to settle out within this facility and then discharge. So there actually is a requirement in there that we have to hold the storm back a certain period of time so that we can meet the water quality requirements of the New York State Stormwater Design Guidelines. And all of this is detailed in the engineer's report that was submitted and has been reviewed by staff.
And that's where you get into things like the 4-pond and all that stuff too, right? Yeah.
That is correct. Yes. There's this system, while it just seems as one item on the plan, is actually an intricate three-cell mechanism here, and here to, they each have their own purpose for water quality treatment and water quantity control. But the point is this outlet is controlled such that then this discharge here is at a reduced rate. At the end of the day, what this proposed stormwater management plan does is it maintains the existing points of runoff or discharge from the property, and through the implementation of the stormwater management plan, which is a combination of reduced drainage area to the northeast and implementation of storm sewer infrastructure in the southeast, we're able to reduce the rates of discharge in the post-development condition as the water leaves the property.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
So while you're still around here, you said these are collecting yard runoff here? You pointed those with your laser pointer?
That is correct.
Why is that not required over here?
We do not need to provide any storm sewers here because of the fact that we are achieving the requirements, which is these backyards naturally drain to the east by the existing drainage path. So this land here is lower than the proposed road. So we're trying not to buck gravity, so to speak. I said early on, one of the keys to drainage design is maintaining existing drainage patterns. Don't force water to go where it does not naturally go. So what we're doing here is maintaining the existing drainage that exists along this hedgerow that takes the water to the roadside drainage ditch. We're just maintaining that pattern. We're just intercepting this runoff that comes here because the grade allows it so that we can pipe it to the southwest as part of our storm sewer infrastructure with the development.
And when you put a road through the development, that basically creates, in terms of as the water comes off of that, you need to collect the water so it's not going into the road. So when it comes off, it sheets off of those other front yards, it's going to sheet off towards the road, get collected into, because again, remember, as a house, you want it to sheet away from your foundation. And so in the back, it can just sheet down the hill, but in the front yards, where it's sheeting towards the road, I need to collect that so that I'm not putting puddles in the road for people to drive through.
Correct.
But if the lawns are impervious surfaces, they should absorb some of that.
They do absorb, and one of the things you look at, so going back to your thing, there's no question Henrietta soil has a lot of clay content, right? So it is pervious, but that doesn't mean it doesn't create a lot of runoff. In addition, if you strip the ground of its plant content, like what often happens in agriculture at particular times. No, there are times, believe me, we see it on Martin Road. When in other words, during a particular portion of the season, I don't know if it's the harvest or whatever, when we see it, that there's a time on the one area where we get a lot of runoff because essentially there's nothing there slowing down the water as it runs across. Obviously, as the crops come in, they are more, they're going to suck the water up more than a typical lawn will, and they're going to prevent more runoff. Craig, did you want to?
Yeah, the DEC manual actually allows, as the conversations come from what existing proposed, the
Craig, we can't hear you.
Mike.
You want to use this one so you don't need to?
Thank you, Becky. Sorry, Craig Eckert, Deputy Town Supervisor. The DEC manual, when it's the design for the stormwater, takes into account the actual type of soil, not only from the soil survey from the National Registry as to what type it is, which is Class D here. It's all Class D soils, clay soils. So it takes into account, you have to go through and actually pick the soil type. Then you take into account what was existing before, which agricultural, what fits into the matrix to that system. Then you get what's called a runoff value from that. Then you turn around and you put in what was going to be left as meadow compared to what will be lawn areas, which would be a manicured lawn, which will run off faster than in our agricultural area. That also gets added into that delta system that gets taken up into the pond. So yeah, so your soil structure is part of the matrix for that design system and that delta detention. But they're also looking for that detention because again, you don't get groundwater recharge in clay soils. That pond is supposed to help. Does it help in Class D soils? I think the jury's still out on that, but the DEC still requires the attempt. So I don't know if that helps to answer that question or not. That's what we take a look at also with the soil survey.
Back to the functioning of the pond. So you used the bathtub analogy earlier. So you pull the plug out of the bathtub, it goes out at a controlled rate based on the size of the drain. Ultimately, where does that go? You said it follows a swale, but the arrow sort of stops here.
I'm going to interrupt. Typically, our participants address the board. So I'm going to ask Mr. Bars to sit down. I'm going to ask the gentleman to come up to the podium and to address the board, please.
Sure. So ultimately, where does that water go?
So if you remember off the back, it goes out the existing drainage, essentially what's a swale or a stream that carries it. There's a culvert under the road and continues out towards the west and joins into, I think ultimately, is this the Red Creek system or the Allen's Creek system? Is that, do you know, Craig? Yeah.
Would it go to Cedar Swamp?
What's that?
Would it go to Cedar Swamp?
Yeah. There's a couple different, yeah, ultimately, I don't know where it goes, but the point is, it's wherever it goes to today, that they're not changing that. They're just, it's getting there at a slower rate so that, you know.
That's true, but Mr. Vars did just, in fact, mention that it's going to intercept all the runoff with pollutants that he also mentioned. Those are not there. Those are not there today.
Which is why there's the settling pond in there today. But there are pollutants in that stream today because there are other roadways, there are other roofs, there are other properties.
So we're going to add to that.
We are. Well, again, other than what gets settled out in the pond. That's the whole point of the stormwater management system. But my point is, if you are under the belief that pollutants get through that system today, we're adding to that, right? Craig's insistent that no, the pollutants don't get through. So he doesn't agree with your assessment. We're adding to the amount of impervious surface. We'll put it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, sorry, Craig after Tom Henrietta. The pollutants are also the vegetation around the pond system.
Craig? I'm sorry, can you speak closer to the microphone? That one's not picking up as well.
He's a little tall for the podium. Okay.
Is that better, Becky? I don't know if it's on. Let's try this.
You might be better off coming.
Is this better?
Yeah, that might
Except
work
she didn't
better.
give you a clean cover for
You
that.
should sanitize that one.
Gonna need another cover.
You got your mask on, you're okay.
The pollutants are also dealt with the vegetation that goes around the pond. So there are specific vegetation types that will eat metals, phosphorus, different types, so the barberries and et cetera, which also go around what's called an aquatic bench, which is a safety mechanism. So kids and people don't enter and can't get out because it's mucky. Especially in our clay soil, it becomes a muck type of system. So the vegetation that's around there is also specified by the DEC. It's very expensive aquatic benching plantings to take up and help to eat those metals and other items that will come off. Now, some of the oils and stuff that will settle, that stays in the pond, and the other materials and such, they do a great job. I don't know about actually making it zero, so we will be increasing. I would have to say that some will be increased, but the DEC system does allow for a very large reduction in any kind of other pollutants that would go downstream. That is one of their main, also along with the quality, or the quantity is the quality of water that's going downstream. It's also temperature control because it's coming off hotter from pavement and rooftops. So it sits in there to also reduce temperature to be released at a temperature that's more allowable to the downstream wet wildlife, etc. that might be there, salmon, anything else that might be downstream from that, everything is taken into account with that DEC concept. So I just wanted to make that clear, okay?
Sure. Thanks. Craig and Chris do a lot of this and monitor this extensively so as to, again, not just this development, all developments. This is one area that we do pay a lot of attention because let's face it, we live in a floodplain, a clay covered floodplain. So, as we saw, was it just about a year ago when we had the massive flood that took out the Castle Road culvert? If it rains hard, all the streams swell and overflow because there is a lot of runoff. So anything we can do to detain that helps out tremendously. In fact, one of the things that we've got in the works is looking at detaining some of the water south of Town Hall, south of the Rush Henrietta bus area to reduce the rate at which it enters Red Creek, because Red Creek swells over its banks all the time. And so, you know, again, the more we can do to detain the water coming in from upstream, the better off are the results downstream. And you know, we're constantly trying to do those things. Sometimes we do it out of the drainage budget. Wherever we can, we get developers to do it because we don't have to spend taxpayer dollars that way. You know, so a lot of times when they're improving even an existing facility that's already there, they're going to have to make it meet the newer requirements for the stormwater pollution prevention. It's a lot stricter than it was, you know, 5, 10, 15 years ago. As they learn and get better at this, they being the EPA and the DEC, you know, they're engineering better systems. And don't be fooled. It's not just a pond. It is an engineered system. As I mentioned, there's multiple tiers. It's designed to, as we talked about, to turn the water up, to retain it a particular amount of time. The vegetation's in there specific. The whole thing is geared towards preventing as much as possible, both pollutant runoffs, and that is not just, by the way, from, you know, the roads and the roofs. It's also from people who throw down fertilizer on their yards. So you know, there's all this work to try to improve the quality of the streams, and especially downstream as you go further. And I can tell you, having been in the imaging science business, one of the things we used to study, and I'm sure they still do, is the flumes that come out of Genesee River. It's reduced, it's still a lot. But when you compare what was coming out of that river in 1985 versus what's coming out today, it's night and day. And a lot of it, there's a lot of factors in it. As you're a farmer, I'm sure you're aware of the precision agriculture, where the idea is I look at the health of my crop so that I'm putting down less fertilizer, saves you money, saves runoff, especially into the fields, right? There's a lot of different practices, a lot of different things that have gone into working on improving water quality, and it has made a noticeable, discernible difference. Again, as someone who used to do that for a living, I can tell you the water quality coming out of the Genesee River into the bay, you could see it and you could track its path through the lake. It was so noticeably icky, for lack of a scientific term. One of the things is my favorite scientific terms, Gelbstoffe. It's a German term. It means yellow stuff, but it's basically, it's not even, it's a natural pollutant. It's from decaying leaves and plant-based materials. So, you know, it's something that there's a lot of science to it, and our engineering team does a really good job making sure our developers live up to those requirements. Don, you had more?
Yeah, we have some more online ones.
And I have a resident with their hand raised too when you're done, Don.
Okay.
Rachel says, these are a little old. I'm not sure if she's even, let's see if she's on.
Go ahead. Just read it.
Do we need another park in Henrietta? Again, Steve, a lot more traffic being added to Ward Hill Road. My point exactly. Another town park with only access is Ward Hill.
So in my opinion, I think we do. Your opinion may differ. The question will be on Wednesday, whether the other town board members agree with me or they agree with Rachel or whoever it was.
Okay, Miller says, regarding the Mendon Ponds that Mr. Schultz just mentioned, people that live in this area can drive or bike to that site in order to enjoy hiking, biking, picnics, playgrounds, etc. Why do we need this park when we already have access to it?
Again, I believe will be a good addition to our town. Other opinions may vary.
And then this is and then Anonymous has a question that we've heard a few times before. I don't know if it's come up tonight though. You say you cannot turn down a builder for past work done. I don't see in the town code where it says you can't. This builder has had numerous town and county violations as well as building issues with countless residents. Please advise. His last developed property also has numerous complaints. You say it's a civil suit. Does the builder word mean nothing? You trust the builder because he keeps telling you he doesn't have the money right now. Why does this mean nothing to the town?
I don't care whether he has the money or not. I've never asked him whether he has the money or not. In terms of that's a decision, a financial decision for him to make. We basically said that we have to meet these requirements from the zoning law and from the seeker standpoint. I'm not sure where that comment about whether he says he does it or doesn't have the money. Is there pushback when we put a requirement on them because they say, oh, you're going to cost me a lot? Of course there is. Every developer says that. That's no different. In terms of the violations, I'm not, again, the issues we've had in the past had to do with some overzealous contractors doing things ahead of inspection schedules. So what we are doing is we are increasing the rate of inspection to prevent that. And we've made it clear that if something goes in without inspection, it's going to come back out and go back in with inspection. So, again, we can pay attention to those kinds of issues. And I will also note that this is not the only developer we've had that problem with. We've had that developer with problem with a bunch of developers. One of the things you find with a lot of developers, when you look at it, they're tying up their resources. They're trying to get stuff done, and they push, and sometimes they push ahead of schedule, and they don't get out there, and we don't get an inspection. And if that happens, we can either try to inspect in post, or we can make them pull it out and put it back in. And we've made it clear that based on a previous incident at the last development, that's the route we're going to go for this one. And he's aware of that. So he will instruct his contractors to be aware of that and not to push and not to cross the line. That burden's on him to make sure that his contractors live up. They're working for him. So that's his requirement. I'm not, again, that's the burden we're putting on it. This whole thing about we're not doing any of this stuff because he says he doesn't have money. That's not our concern. Our concern is, are we doing stuff that follows town code, that follows seeker, that does stuff in a fair and equal manner? And we believe we are. Now, like I said, in looking at a couple of things, going back to that exchange of, well, if we take this town park, we're going to take that. Could I have asked him to build the road all the way out and run the water all the way out? I could have asked that. But when you then look at, again, from the comparable costs, that's an unfair burden in our estimation. So we asked him, okay, I want it carried past all of the existing property onto what would become the town land. We thought that was a fair and equal exchange. And the idea behind that being twofold. One, it gets it out to where we're going to connect. Two, we don't have to then deal with having our construction equipment in between existing houses, right? So now our construction equipment is only on the town land. So I didn't do it because he did or didn't have the money. He could be the, crazy rich, and I'd still have that same rule. I wouldn't put an unfair burden on him just because he has money. I'm not going to put an unfair burden on the town because he doesn't have the money. If he doesn't have the money, he's not going to do the project. We've got to do stuff fair and equitable. We have to do stuff following the town code, following New York State laws, following seeker, and that's how we operate. That's how we do it all. I don't know how else to address that.
We got one more from a raised hand, Stan and Judy.
So Becky, are you going to?
Hello?
There you go.
Hi. You keep talking about sewer systems up there. Is that an actual sewer system, or are they all going to be on septic?
They are going to be on a sewer system. It ties into the property on the west. They're bringing sewer in from the west.
From where?
Woodridge.
That's south, isn't it?
It's west of, it's west of the development. So basically, Becky, could you bring up the property that, or the one that shows the rendering of the houses in the town park? So basically, if you go out the corner, it's basically the part that's farthest west. It's the northern corner of that western arm. That's where the sewer comes in.
Huh.
And then basically, yeah, through the cul-de-sac. And one of the things we've asked them to do is put in a connection in there in the event that those 4 houses ever want to go sewer in the future. Those 4
Okay,
houses.
just the 4 houses?
The 4 houses on Ward Hill Road, sorry.
Right. Well, there's more than 4 on Ward Hill. But, all righty. I'm farther east than the 4 houses.
Oh, you're east of this property on Ward Hill?
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to offer it to you because gravity's working against you.
Gotcha. All right, I was just curious. So it's definitely is a septic system.
A sanitary system.
I'm
yeah.
sorry. All right, thank you so much.
You bet. The one thing we were considering potentially doing septic was the restrooms for the cabin. They would either be a septic system or we would put in a grinder pump and pump them back up along the road to the sanitary system. That will depend largely on the soil conditions down there. If the soil conditions are such that we can't have a leach field, and
right,
we engineer a leach field, it would be cheaper to run the force main up. If the soil conditions are good down there for a leach field, it would be cheaper to do the septic.
All right, gotcha.
That's a
All right.
decision we're making in the future.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Anybody here? Anybody online? Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming and expressing your concerns. You know, again, in this particular instance for what we're covering the whether we're going to do the town park, and that vote will be Wednesday. Tomorrow night at the planning board, they will be doing the seeker determination followed by preliminary site plan approval, up or down, and it'll go from there. So obviously if seeker is determined or they don't have site plan approval, then we wouldn't agree to take the parkland. So again, I don't know how it's going to go. I haven't in any way polled the planning board, talked to them. I just know when I look at the seeker side of things anyway, it strikes me that he's mitigated all of the issues from a seeker standpoint. You know, unfortunately, he still has a lot of residents and especially former customers who are upset at him, and that's unfortunate. That's not part of seeker determination. Since we're currently in public, I guess I would just ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Hearing no objections, meeting adjourned.